Mike Levine. Welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel Albu.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, given the fact that you worked on both The Dig and Loom, which are my two favorite point-and-click adventure games, I think that this conversation is long overdue.
I only tested Loom.
Yeah, well,
I guess
still worked on it.
Yeah. I'm humble. You'll hear.
So let's start at the beginning. How exactly did you get to be a QA at LucasArts?
Well, I told you I needed to do a couple things before we dive into this.
Mm-hmm.
This is my special surprise Rocky 3 ending without punching it. First of all, I just want to say I've watched a few of your interviews, and I think what you're doing is amazing. You know, like some people I run into at GDC from LucasArts, I was just like, it's the past. I don't like looking back, but I've never minded that. And honestly, I wish, like I was just saying to you, I wish I had more time to watch even more of them, because it's just, you get to hear little tidbits and things that you never knew about people, even working with them for years and years. So I thought that was really cool. So I just wanted to start out, give me 5 minutes, because like before we just start talking about me, which we won't, but I just kind of think of this as sort of like my Academy Award shout out to all the people who helped me along the way at LucasArts, plus people I just think deserve general shout outs. So let me just pull up my list and humor me here. And I'll try to go quick, but if you want to ask anything along the way, you can. And by the way, there are some notable people not on this list, and obviously going to be people I forgot about. But like, for example, Tim's not on this list because he doesn't need my shout out, but I love Tim and he knows that. So these are kind of the forgotten people. And again, people who helped me out along the way. So Lucy Bradshaw, who hired me. Purple, James Hampton, who was my first boss in QA, Wayne and Mark Cartwright, who were my other bosses in QA, really took me under their wing and taught me so much in the early days. Dave Popovich, who sadly passed away, was another QA lead. Jesse Clark, who was a good buddy in the early days and really is largely responsible for getting me to work in the art department and on Sam & Max. Captain Trips, Wotan and Mad Max, and all the other people in QA, which we can talk more about. Colette Michaud, art director, one of the heart and souls of LucasArts. Aaron Mozowski, this is in random order. On the marketing front, I wanted to shout out to Mary Burr, another one of the heart and souls of LucasArts and someone I've worked closely with there and have remained in touch with over the years, and Sue Sesserman and Tom Saris, who worked under her. Then we move into Dave Grossman, Mike Stemley. Some of these are guys, I've remained friends with over the years. A programmer, I don't even remember his last name, Toshi, but he was great in the early days. The sound guys, Peter, Clint, Larry O, Julian as well. A good friend of mine, Wallace Poulter, that I worked with early on there and has been a lifelong friend and worked on Loom, FM Towns, testing with him and Monkey. Eric Wilmunder. Then I'm going to move into my art department friends. First and foremost, I mentioned Colette already, but Peter Chan, who is one of my dearest friends and taught me a lot and teaches me a lot all the time, and just an honor, to work with him. Larry Ahern, who we've worked with and is a good friend. Steve Purcell, of course, who I'm sure we'll talk more about all these people. Bill Stoneham, Chris Hockabout, Tom Harper, Kyle Balda, Kalani Stryker, who I worked with on a lot of the Nintendo stuff. From IT, Tom Cottle and Joan Amberg. Gabe from Fulfillment. I'm going everywhere here. John Knowles, who just was incredibly always teaching me in the early days. Anson Jew, Peter Sakel. I'm almost done. Humor me. Then we got, I would call another powerhouse force of Mike Ebert, Dean Sharp, and Harrison Fong, who made Zombies Ate My Neighbors and all those other games. And again, Mike and Dean, just forces of nature. Then my Dark Forces friends and good friends, Justin Chin, Ray and Kim Gresco, Andrew Nelson, Chris Ross, Gary Gaber, Winston Wolfe, Matt Tadaishi, Ralph Girth, Jim Rice, and Tony Shea, who all still work with me, and Julian, again. Laurie Beck, give her a shout out as well. And then last four ILM friends who really were very helpful to me. David B. Edney, who passed away recently, Dan McNamara, Forrest Key, and Chad Taylor. There we go. Now we can talk about me.
Wow. First of all, it's a very impressive list, and it's nice that you got to thank all of these people, and you wanted to start the conversation with you thanking them. It's very generous of you. And it's a very interesting list. Some of these people I've interviewed in the past, and it's great that you mentioned, Kyle Balda, who was, an intern on Day of the Tentacle, and that's about it. So you've mentioned some people that not too many people know that have worked at LucasArts. For example, Kyle Balda, many people know as the director of Minions and not as the creator of the iconic intro for Day of the Tentacle. So well done, Mike. You truly surprised me.
It's a little hit list for you, maybe, for more interviews.
Yeah. Once I'll be done with this list, then I'll get you in for another interview. And then you'll get me a newer list of more people for you to thank and for me to interview.
I had to talk to Ralph and others on my team. We were like, who am I forgetting? I was adding people probably minutes before this interview.
So back to my original question. How exactly did you get to be a QA at LucasArts?
Okay. So first off, I just want to say, in general, I've always felt very humbled, honored, and lucky to have gotten to work there. And it really was, in many ways, dumb luck. But it changed my entire life and my professional career and everything I've done. So I've always felt a lot of gratitude towards it, what I've learned there, and really, in many ways, everything I've done since is trying to replicate that spirit, that magic that we had there, right? Which isn't easy to replicate, but that's why I try to hire people who work there as much as I can and things like that. So for me, okay. So I grew up on the East Coast, right outside of Boston. Went to school, went to college at UMass out here in Western Mass, where I now live, and was a journalism major. And the farthest thing from my mind was working on video games for a living. It really just never even crossed my mind. And the conservative background I grew up in, where they show you all your career choices, that wasn't even on the list, right? Obviously. And I finished college. A bunch of my friends had moved to California. One of my hobbies in college was I saw a lot of Grateful Dead shows. And so if I could move to California in the Bay Area and not have to travel around as much, that seemed like a good idea. And the plan was I was going to go to grad school at UC Berkeley because they had a great journalism program. And I was interested in that and sort of progressing that and documentary film. But you needed to be a resident of California for a year to get in. And so I needed a job. And I moved to the East Bay, not to Marin, living in Richmond, essentially, El Cerrito. I got a job. I probably found it in the paper for one day, delivering phone books. And let's just say where I was delivering to them, the neighborhoods I was delivering to did not exactly make me feel safe. And it just didn't take me, I don't even think I lasted a full day. I'm just like, I'm not doing this. I called the guy. I'm like, no, thank you. So I I think the next day I just started looking in the paper, and I always joke I have no idea how often they did this, if this was the one time they ever did it, but somehow there was literally a job in the paper. Lucasfilm, somewhere I have it in a file. Lucasfilm, testers wanted. I was like, what? What's that all about? And it was like something video games, blah blah blah. I called up. They're like, sure, come in for an interview. I did a little bit of research. Of course, this is well before the internet, so how much research could you do? My research was, I knew they made PC games, okay? And so growing up on the East Coast, I honestly didn't play a lot of PC games. I was a console game guy. That's what I grew up playing in television, Atari, Nintendo, etc. And I literally called up a friend I went to college with who played PC games, and I was like, give me the names of a couple PC games I could tell him I played, because I didn't know any. So yeah, I bullshitted my way in. But I always joke, I don't know why they hired me. I had a college degree, which was somewhat rare in the test pit, but maybe I'm just trying to justify that for my parents. But yeah, by hook or crook, and I can't really remember. I seem to remember like they wanted me to start very quickly. So I did the interview, and I think like maybe it was on a Thursday or Friday, and I feel like I was starting by the next week. And yeah, we can get into what happened then. But
so when exactly did you start working there?
This is a point my wife and I were trying to figure out, but my best guess is probably like May 91.
Okay. And what was the interview process at LucasArts like?
They put me in a little room, which I remember having been in those halls many times later. It was on that outside of the test pit, and it was Lucy. I think it was Mark Cartwright, and there might have been one other person. I don't think Purple was there. I don't think I met him till after. And they asked me a bunch of questions. I don't really remember what they asked me. I definitely told them I played console games, and that's another secret theory of mine, that maybe that's why they hired me, because even though Mark and people in the test pit didn't know this, the executives probably knew, like, hey, in a year we're going to be doing Nintendo games, and maybe having some people around who knew console games were good, but who knows? Yeah, so I really don't remember much about what they asked me. I remember getting along with them and just being personable about it.
And what was your first day at LucasArts like?
So, as much as I can remember, because probably I'm blurring the first few days together, honestly. Well, I wanted to mention one thing also that I forgot to, that, so growing up on the East Coast, and this another reason I was kind of attracted to this job maybe was one of my relatives, a great aunt of mine. I'm giving her a shout out too now, Aunt Cecile. She was a movie critic for 40 years in Boston. And so she would take me to movie premieres growing up. Most notable were Star Wars. And so I was the kid who got to see it before anyone and come into school and spoil things. Probably I was horrible. Like, hey, guess what? But it just had a huge impact on me, as a kid. And so when I saw Lucasfilm, which it still was at the time, Lucasfilm Games, I have some props here to prove it. Here we go. Here's my Lucasfilm Games stationery.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I got lots of Lucasfilm games. There's even notes on there, which I have no idea what they're from. Yeah, it didn't turn to LucasArts, I think, till about 6 months after I was there. But yeah, so my first day, and in general, honestly, the first several weeks, if not months, it was a massive, well, definitely the first few weeks, it was a massive culture shock to me. Massive. And I honestly didn't know if I was going to make it or fit in. Because, so the test pit, I don't know how much you've talked about the test pit, which was first of all, again, I just want to say, like, I feel very lucky that I got to sort of what I see was the end of an era. Like, because I feel like I saw the last year and a half of sort of the and I know it's all relative to when everyone starts or whatever, but there was definitely something that I got to experience that then eventually changed and morphed and whatnot. So 91, things were very raw. And the test pit, it was raw in more ways than one, let me tell you. Anyone who worked in there will tell you. But it was just, first of all, it was a bunch of very young kids, and I will probably say that many times because that was all of LucasArts for the most part, was a lot of very young kids, mainly who were from Marin, right? I used to joke, these were the first kids I met who like were proud to say they like Def Leppard. Like, this might sound weird, but like growing up on the East Coast, like whatever, maybe we were snobs, like, oh yeah, we would never admit that publicly. Like, we like these other cool bands, whatever. Black Sabbath, Van Halen, Def Leppard. It was just a very different culture. Eventually I did find like sort of people who took me under their wing pretty early, but this is one story I guess I could tell that is a good example of this. So I met Purple. He was my first boss, and we definitely did butt heads, but I do totally love and respect the guy. And I remember he put me, the first thing they had me do was test Monkey 2. It was kind of in the middle of testing Monkey 2. The game wasn't done, but I think it was like maybe 80% done. And they kind of dropped me in and really didn't give me any training at all. It was just like, here, test this, find bugs. And I'm just like, what? Like, what's a bug? Like, and so that was a little bit of slow learning. But I remember once Purple left me in his office alone, and he had a phone, a dial-up, whatever, landline phone, and he had completely dismantled it. Like, it was completely taken apart, right? Like, and like in life, there's builders and there's deconstructors, right? He was a deconstructor. I am a builder. So I'm like, oh, let me put that back together. He'll thank me, young, stupid. And he comes in, he loses his mind. What? How could you do that to my phone? I was like, right there, I was like, oh shit, this guy's now mad at me. And this is like my second day. And I'm just like, okay, is that a rebuild? And I think there was even a point, maybe even a couple weeks in, I think I remember now, wow, I didn't even remember this, that they talked to me. They were like, kind of gave me almost a warning or something. Like, but I defended myself like I always did. And I was like, you guys literally just dropped me in here. Like, and again, I didn't know anything about adventure games. So I was kind of like trying to figure it out on the fly. But again, I always found people who like took me under their wing and helped me, basically, because the test pit was just this really unique place. First of all, everyone had a nickname. You had to have a nickname. They tried to call me Squiggy, and I was like, please, no, don't do that. So I had to tell them my nickname from growing up. Because I used to have slick back hair, like Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley. But yeah, almost every single person had a nickname, and it was just this insane culture. Once I remember, because we had games all messages, and this was probably a few months in, but I was just like, yeah, I'm going back home to Beantown. And like everyone in the company was just like, what are you talking about? But like Hal Barwood was like, I know what he's talking about. It's like, so I would find the Boston East Coast people, the sound guys, oh, wait, you went to Harvard? Wait a minute. So, but eventually, I think I did start to really, it didn't take me long, let's put it this way, to really feel that there was something very special going on there. And I remember coming home to my girlfriend at the time after like a couple weeks going like, I could work there for a while, I think. Like, this place is, I didn't expect this, like I just thought it was just going to be a job. And I could just tell I'm good at sort of, and maybe it's because I work there and it's always been a good rudder for me, but like just that kind of energy and I'll just use the word magic because it's all I can think of really. And the magic just comes from the people, just so many smart people in one building together who were trying to achieve a common goal, So yeah, So I started learning about adventure games and testing, and this is what I was thinking about this and talking to some of my friends before this, and it's funny about LucasArts and testing, because there was definitely a culture. I think one of your interviews you were talking about the monkey wrench puzzle, right, in Monkey Island, and I just remember this. It wasn't as much over the years, but of course I left QA. But like in those early days, especially, and it made me think of this too because I recently watched the special on NASA on CNN where they talked about how there was this sort of the culture flipped on itself because like it was supposed to be open, but everyone was too afraid to say anything. So like in the test pit, there was definitely this culture of like, do not ask for help to figure out a puzzle. That was shame, right? Seriously. If you like, and I learned early on, like if I needed help, I would go over and whisper to like one of my buddies, like, I can't get past this. Please, God. And because if you ask publicly, it was like, have you tried every option? Blah, blah. And of course, once they told you, you felt stupid. But, looking back on it, and this is easy, everything's more clear in hindsight. But, what they should have been doing was that really encouraging people to talk about which ones were hard, right? They should have been tracking that. It's like, hey, everyone's getting stuck on this monkey wrench thing. Why is that, right? But because we were so afraid to talk about it, it's just sort of an interesting, I think, dilemma occurred there.
That's interesting to hear because on one hand, it's better for you to not know how to solve a puzzle because you trying out everything is what we as players would probably do. And so it's a great way for you to test the game. But I think that it would be better if, in addition to testing out bugs, you could also have feedback on the gameplay itself or the puzzles. Because unlike Sierra, which took pride in selling hint books and having that as a very profitable business, it seemed from my conversation with Chris Brown that the hint line was supposed to be the connection between the players and the company, and not something that was supposed to be there just as a way to make more money. So knowing which puzzles were difficult for people, especially testers, you'd think that testers who are constantly playing these adventure games would be better at solving these type of puzzles, especially if you're constantly playing LucasArts adventure games, which after a while you get the gist of what puzzles in LucasArts adventure games are. So you couldn't tell anyone. I mean, you couldn't just go to Ron Gilbert and tell him, you know what, that monkey wrench puzzle.
I can tell you some stories. We'll get into some other games with some other things like that did happen, actually. Fate of Atlantis, I remember. There was quite a brouhaha. But, look, I always joke, and I'm probably exaggerating, but like the dirty secret of LucasArts adventure games is they used to make as much money off the hint books as they did the games, especially as it went on further and further. And the hint books, when they, like I said, when we started, it was all free, right? I got to see that era. But they quickly realized, like, wait a minute, this is a business. And so, like, Joe Ashburn, Captain Trips, he was a very good writer. So they're like, hey, you're good at this. And that became like a job for him. Like, he would stop testing. He would test it first, of course. But then it was like, okay, now it's your turn to write. And he would write most of those hint books with I think, some help from others. And that became a major business there as time went on, which was a little, look, thinking of that now with the internet, it's kind of laughable with walkthroughs and everything. But yeah, and it just probably as the game sold more. Yeah, I mean, I was not on that side of the business, so I cannot comment on that much at all.
I always like to think of the hint books as Sierra's and LucasArts' way of fighting piracy, because even if you pirated the game, then you'd still need the hint book. So at least you paid something If not for the full game, then for the
Right.
hint book.
Otherwise, you're opening a box with these thin floppy. I have some other props for you. Don't call me Carrot Top, but I was good. I didn't bring it up, but I found my swaddle box downstairs in my basement, and it was so heavy, and I was like, "What is in here?" And I opened it, and literally, I remember reading it too. It's like this thick, and it's the manual, but it also has like it's a history book. This entire history of wars and air battles over in World War II. So that was really crazy. And wait a minute, I forgot. I was meant to start with this. What am I doing? This is to prove I am really OG LucasArts. Yes, or that I don't throw anything out. Boom.
Is this red fez connected to Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis?
I have no idea, but I just remember they gave them out to all of us, and I never threw it out. There you go. Wow. I'm not looking silly any longer. That's it.
So
has a lot of dust.
There's a red fez puzzle in.
Yeah. No, I remember that definitely. But it was all. Yeah, they must have given it around that time. But like the red fez was kind of thing. I think it was even bigger than that. Maybe it was.
So this was given out to employees for free because it seems like they were forcing you guys to purchase the leather jackets at a discount.
Yeah, I always used to joke. You get to work at LucasArts, you get the honor of buying ILM shirts at a discount, which believe me, I bought many of.
Now you mentioned that you liked Star Wars, and many of the people I interview also like Star Wars, and usually it's the only thing they knew about Lucasfilm at the time. Some of them didn't even know that Lucasfilm had a computer games division.
Me neither.
No. Talking about Star Wars during their interview or at work, was it frowned upon, or you guys could fanboy about Star Wars as much as you wanted?
Not initially. I mean, I'm just trying to think. Like in those early days, I kind of divide this into maybe two answers. Because right in those first years, which I got to see, there were no Star Wars. Right, it was just something that we weren't working on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could talk about it, sure, but it was not like something. But it was obviously like all around you. The matte paintings were literally around you, like and props. And when you walked outside, you were seeing the ILM model shop and all that kind of stuff. So it was there. But I think, as we started making more Star Wars games, I mean, it became apparent who were true hardcore fans who knew the movies inside and out. John Knowles comes to mind as someone who was just like, you didn't question his Star Wars knowledge, like he knew what he was doing. And I remember just having to watch the movies again and again, probably to the point where it got me sick of it, honestly, but like just watching them so many times, especially, jumping ahead now, but when we were doing Rebel Assault and Dark Forces and that kind of stuff, just because we wanted to be as accurate as we could be.
Now, before we get to the games that you're actually credited on, I wanted to talk about some of the games that failed to credit you as QA. So we'll start off with... We'll start off with Monkey Island 2. What were some of the more notable bugs you encountered on this game?
Oh, God. This might fall into very hard to remember. I mean, I can kind of answer it this way, which I wanted to get here anyways, is that, I'm so happy that I got to start working in the test pit and on Monkey 2. And I tell people to this day that, like, when they ask, how do I get into the games industry? QA is such a great place to start because particularly at LucasArts, QA was this place where kind of everyone came to visit, right? Not everyone, but the cool people, let's put it that way. And this is how I got to know people, right? Because a lot of times, like Mike Stemley, I remember, like, walk in, pencil behind there, show me this bug, like this was before we started recording things on VHS and stuff because we had to prove it to them. Like, I think that was more for the Nintendo games because there weren't like RC hookups back then for PCs and stuff, but we could do that for Nintendo games, and some other systems had them. But so they'd have to come in, right, to see the bug. So the programmers would come in, the audio guys would come in, the designers would come in. And so it was an amazing kind of melting pot and executives would come in because be like, what's going on? That was where the rubber hit the road, right? And so if you want to know what was really going on and how close it was really to shipping, you ventured in to the test pit. I just remember Monkey 2. Like I said, I remember having a lot of trouble with it. I remember some bugs where, I'm not even sure if I'm thinking of the right game. I remember some bugs where the characters would fly across the screen and, just kind of exciting bugs like that. But for the most part, it's when you get into this almost rhythm of doing testing. All my friends would all say to me when I was, oh my God, you're testing games for a living. This must be the greatest job ever. And I'm like, yeah, try playing the same game every day. And not just 8 hours a day, because we started early and we worked late, especially when we were in crunch. This was before the word crunch existed. It was just assumed. And so it's it ceased to be fun after playing through Monkey Island, 20 times, right? It just sort of that it just became you're looking at it not for fun at that point. The jokes are still making you laugh, but you're kind of looking beneath the surface for things, and you're trying all kinds of weird, crazy things to make bugs happen. So it's a different mentality.
I guess it's just like being an usher in the cinema, where you see the same movie over and over again, and you never want to see it again.
It's probably a good analogy.
Still in 1991, you worked as a tester on the FM Towns version of Loom.
Yep.
Did you get to play the original EGA version before diving into the testing of the FM Towns version?
Wow. I have no idea. I want to say no. I think I was there because Loom was already shipped, I think. When did you probably know? When did Loom ship? I think it was...
Loom shipped in 1990, but the FM Towns version shipped around... Release dates aren't exact at that point in time, so it was around April-May 1991, so I presume that it's one of the first things that you've tested. So
yeah, it was definitely right after Monkey, and I think they gave it to me because no one else wanted to do it. And it was you're the new guy. And that's how I kind of got to know Wallace, because he was in charge of that. And there was a programmer, I had to ask Wallace's name, Jim Lederman, who was in charge of the FM Towns ports. And he would come in almost every day, big round glasses, and he'd just want to know what was going on. It was a weird computer. I mean, it was kind of in between a Mac and a PC, if I remember correctly. And there was kanji involved, so there was that.
So how did you know that that the text doesn't have any spelling mistakes? Were these things that you were supposed to test for?
No, they didn't ask us to check those. There must have been someone else testing for that. It was just play through the game, make sure it works. Yeah, I want to say I tested Monkey 2 first on FM Towns and then Loom, but I could be wrong. It could have been Loom, but I definitely tested Monkey also on FM Towns.
And did you get to test the Loom CD version?
I think so. I mean, was FM Towns a CD-based machine?
So the FM Towns wasn't the talkie version. So the FM Towns was the VGA port of the EGA version, while the CD version that was released in 1992 had full talkie of sorts, because they cut half of the dialogue because they recorded the voices on CD audio and they didn't have enough space on the CD audio. So, and they removed
I definitely tested some version with audio because I have Bobbin burned into my brain.
Maybe it's from the audio drama.
Yeah, maybe.
And do you remember any of the bugs you encountered on Loom, or?
Oh God!
Again, I'm asking too much.
No, and no, it's fine. It's just it wasn't something I was on for a long time. Honestly, I think it was like maybe 2 to 3 weeks, kind of a thing. So, yeah, I can remember what the machine looked like. Let's put it that way.
Good enough. Now, speaking
In a
of
lot of
Monkey Island,
years.
and now speaking of Monkey Island 2, the FM Towns version, 2 years ago, someone on Twitter discovered that the FM Towns version of Monkey Island 2 lacked the part where Guybrush uses the fishing pole to get the map piece from the cliff. Now, from my previous interviews with ex-LucasArts people, it appears that it was an issue with implementing vertical scrolling in animated scenes on the FM Towns. Did you, as a tester on this version, receive prior knowledge about this issue and its solution? Or did you discover it on your own and perceive it as a bug?
Honestly, as you're saying it, it does sound familiar. That's like I do remember that. I remember FM Towns like just being very chuggy at times with scrolling and things like that. But yeah, that was probably above my pay grade at the time.
If you would have tested only the FM Towns version, then you probably wouldn't notice something like that. But
Right.
having tested the original version, then you'd probably notice that it just skips through the map piece, gets to you see the
See, if I saw it, the more you're talking about it, you're jogging my memory. Honestly, it's just I literally haven't thought of this in 30 years. Yeah,
Okay, you want to see that part?
sure.
Okay.
This is your life at LucasArts.
So the thing is that, the map piece.
Oh my God. See, you're literally jogging my memory now. Yeah.
So the map piece flies away, and then you see the map of Booty Island, and then you see the map piece flying to the cliff. And at this point in the original game, you'd need to get to the cliff, then use the fishing pole to get it. But in the FM Towns version, the bird just flies away with the map piece. You see the bird? And this is something that's supposed to happen after you try using the fishing pole on the map piece, and then the bird needs to take the map piece from the fishing pole, and then you'd get to this part. So I always wonder. So I always wonder if the developers noticed this issue with the FM Towns version and just figured out that it's easier to just skip this part of the game. But given the fact that you tested the game, I wondered whether or not you noticed.
It's not jogging a major memory. My guess is it was like all in Jim Lederman's hands at that point. Like, I don't even, like the guys on Monkey were probably done with it and working on Dot or whatever they were at that point. And so, maybe he showed it to them. It was, I don't remember it being a big deal at LucasArts, right? Like, I was the only one testing it, I think. Like, there was only one person. So, but my memory of those days, it's just we were moving project to project all the time, so it was just hard to kind of keep track of it. And obviously my memory is shot. So, but we were testing things like Paul Park Ranger and the disappearing ducks in between this, like the sort of things no one else wanted to test, which was a giant laser disc. I don't know if anyone's talked about this project, Lucas Learning or whatever it was called back then, GLEF. Yeah, it was a whole education for schools and giant laser discs, and we would have to flip them over all the time during testing. It was crazy.
Now, in 1992, you worked as a tester on Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, again, uncredited.
Yep.
And on this game, Brett Migalewski was the sole tester for quite a while. At what point in the testing process did you join the QA team?
Towards the end, again, which is probably why I didn't get credit there. But as I've seen in your other interviews, you're pretty much starting to expose that a large group of the credits at LucasArts were largely a sham. especially when I came into it. But it was really controlled top down. You have people who got credit who don't even know why they got credit, and people like me who actually worked on it who didn't get credit. So that's how it went back then. But yeah, Fate, I got brought in again. It was probably that game. You probably know better than me how long it was being made for, but when we were
18 months.
testing it, okay, so it was probably the last, I'm going to guess, 3 to 4 months. And there was a lot of people who were brought on towards the end. Me, Wotan, I remember particularly, because I'll tell you a story. Um, but yeah, I think like a lot of us were brought on towards the end to kind of brute force test it, go through, just make sure nothing was missed, because like you said, maybe there was only one tester previously. So it was getting close to the release, but I remember there was some major part that we were waiting for forever that wasn't in still, for one of the paths or something maybe. But so we were just banging on it constantly. This is again why I have Sophia burned into my brain. But yeah, I remember, and I wish I could remember more details, but there was a big brouhaha towards the end of this where, and this is back when LucasArts had, this sort of shared email system, Games All Messages, I think it was called, which, seems like out of time now because like anyone could just post a message. It was great. Like, hey, I'm having a party this weekend, or I'm selling this car, or, whatever. Like, I'll be away for a week. But it was the whole company, and there was a message one, so you were even seeing people from across the company. But yeah, I just remember, I don't know who started it. Maybe it was Wotan. But yeah, there was just a big pushback. I think it was particularly about the scene with the snake. There was a giant python in Fate of Atlantis.
Okay.
Is that ringing a bell?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it was just about, I think Wotan was like saying it didn't look like a real snake, and he thought it looked like a giant worm, which really pissed off Hal. And there was just a lot of back and forth, I remember, about it, and I was just ducking my head trying to stay out of the fray. But it was, people, we were all young, and people really cared about things back then, more than they probably should have.
But how did it work exactly for testers who joined late in the testing process? You'd start from scratch. You would start playing the game without actually knowing anything about the game, and without even knowing the fact that there are 3 paths to go through.
We might have known that because maybe they told us and they shouldn't. But like you said earlier, and there's validity. You want to play it blind first time and just see how people do. But, I think given they knew they were also going to do the infamous pizza orgies and things like that, they had that also to get outside feedback on. Because ultimately, like I said, you only have that innocence period, your first couple playthroughs. Then you start looking at things on deeper levels and trying things. And yeah, I think, they just let us dive into it again. Don't ask questions. And, try to get through it, see where people got stuck somewhat, and really just, I think, banging on it, I remember, to try to find bugs, crash bugs. And, I mean, I barely even remember how we used to, I think it was all done in pencil and paper, and we would write bugs down. And, it was just learning that whole process. What's an A bug? What's a B bug? What's a C bug? And if people even agreed on what was a C bug.
And did you get to test the CD version that came out a year later?
Well, yeah, that's probably what I was testing, maybe, because I remember the voice. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't remember. I know I tested one of them.
So the floppy version came out in 1992, and the CD version came out in 1993.
Yeah, see, I was probably out of the test bit by 93, so I probably tested it first without voice, but I was around the voice a lot. I feel like I know that one more than the non-voice one.
Now, in 1993, still in the test bit, you were not credited as a tester on Day of the Tentacle.
This is Mike's non-credits. Yes. No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't work much on Day of the Tentacle. I probably just tested it a little bit at the end again.
Okay.
Yeah. I was like a fan of it and watching it all happen and, probably playing it on the side, but I wasn't like officially testing it. I played it when it came out. I remember that.
So you worked as a tester on the game, but then you actually played the game when it came out without being part of the production.
Because I only got a little taste of it, and I wanted it was right up my alley. Like the games were trending more in sort of that cinematic direction. So, like, yeah, just and the comedy level, I wanted to play it.
Okay.
I was also like, I think at the time I was like testing again things like Paul Park Ranger or Swaddle. I don't know if we're going to talk about I mentioned it before, but like that was a very, it was a different experience. So I was playing something like Dot would be much more relaxing in some ways.
Between 1992 and 1994, you get to test all of the Super Nintendo Star Wars games with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. How was that experience, given the fact that you said in your interview that you have experience with playing console games?
Yeah, so that was like to the best of my memory, probably after I'd been in the test pit 6 months, maybe a little more. Maybe it was 9 months. I can't remember, but Mark Cartwright, who was one of the leads at that point, was like, "Hey, we need people to test these Nintendo games," and so they actually moved us across the street into Z Building, and it was a little weird because we were like forming bonds, and now suddenly we were like just separated. It was like three or four of us over in what was formerly an executive suite. This was like some president or vice president of Lucasfilm or ILM, and they had vacated and they put us in there for whatever reason. I mean, the thing was barren, big office room, and we set up our TVs and Nintendos and just started playing. And yeah, I remember just immediately I felt more comfortable. I was more in the zone of games I was used to, even though by that point I'd started to love adventure games. Like I started to, that didn't take long, just to appreciate what was going on there. But we moved over there, they hired a few new people, and I was just like, okay, this, I can play this really well, and it was a little maddening. I remember like I think it was the Super Star Wars. There's like levels where you're going through like these tunnels and you're trying to shoot these lasers up top. And so every day I would drive home on the Richmond Bridge back to the East Bay, and it literally like I would be having these like flashbacks of like thinking, you have these reactions like, wait, do I need to shoot that? Oh wait, I'm just driving. Yeah, because just again playing those, and that's how I got to know Kalani a little bit, who was really behind those games, and he was kind of ahead of his curve in terms of like wanting to make his games as sadistic and hard as possible. And we used to argue with him about that, and he was like, "No, this is what people want. They want." It's like, we can't literally get past this. He's like, "Yes, you can. Want me to show you? I can do it." And he would show us sometimes, and we're like, "Oh shit, okay, all right." So yeah, those games took a lot of skill. I think, was it Empire? Maybe there was like a final scene where you had to battle Darth Vader, in the end, and that was really, really hard to beat. Like, I think for a while, and they were tweaking the difficulty of it, so I don't know what it ended up, but I remember for a while, I think there was this guy, John Van. He was like the only one who could beat Vader. Then finally someone else did. They were like, I remember actually being, they talked to us because we were like screaming too loud because we were too excited, when we would actually beat a hard level or something. Like, calm down, kids.
Wait, so every time you would test a Super Nintendo game like the Star Wars games or Defenders of Dynatron City or zombies ate my neighbors, you'd have to go to the Z building?
Not all the time, but specifically for Super Star Wars and those three, the series of those, they put us over there. There was definitely probably some Nintendo going on, and when they needed more people, because I definitely remember like recording VHS of them in the test pit as well. I'm trying to remember when Dynatron came into the mix. By the way, I have the marketing poster for Dynatron City, the
Wow.
one that Steve Purcell painted. Yeah. If Gary Winnick wants it, just tell him to get in touch with me. It's gotten a little water damaged over the years, but it's still pretty cool. Yeah, and I have the EEPROM somewhere too for it, I think. But that was actually really, yeah. That was the same group of people. I remember Jesse tested that too, because there were a lot of crass jokes being made, probably Buzzsaw Girl and whatnot. So yeah, that game was over the top. And we also, I just remember that game, I do remember we found crazy weird bugs in. And that's why I think I saved one of the EEPROMs, because there was like some version where like, oh God, like the characters would split in two or something, and like turned into some almost like a multiplayer thing. There were weird tests with it, I think, done, as well, that never made it to market.
Rebel Assault, which was released in 1993, is considered LucasArts' first FMV game, and you're credited on it for special video arrangements. What special video arrangements were required for the production of this game?
Okay, so we should probably just back up a little and talk about how I even got over to the art department.
Mm-hmm.
Because that happened, the Rebel Assault happened after that, really. So okay. After I'd been working there for like a year, I still had not given up on this dream of maybe going to grad school or making documentary films. So I was still in the test department, because I remember I asked Wayne, who was my boss. I got an internship at this place in the city. And this is my paying my dues period, because I was living in the East Bay, working 30 or so plus hours. I kind of cut back a little bit my hours at Lucas. And then I was interning at this place in the city. It was called Bay Area Video Coalition, BAVAC. And they taught a lot of classes there, and documentaries were made there. And so I started to learn about first Photoshop, and then things like Amiga Video Toaster and Avid and Media 100 and After Effects. And at one point, I worked up the gumption. I just remember I asked Colette, I didn't even know her, but I knew they had Macs over there. And I said, hey, would you mind if I used the Macs after work to practice Photoshop? And she was like, sure, that's fine. And I remember she'd poke her head in occasionally and see what I was doing. Because honestly, I mean, it all sounds silly to say now, but this Photoshop was very new. I think there was like maybe one other person who knew it, which was probably Bill Tiller. And so she would poke her heads in and just see what I was doing. And I think after like 2 weeks, she was just like, hey, and this maybe even it must have been somehow coincided with when I was doing Super Star Wars stuff, but it's like, Kalani needs help making maps for those games, which essentially meant putting these sort of tiles together and printing them out, right? Each tile, so they could literally tape it on the wall to Kalani's office, because that's the only way they could there was no tools back then to zoom out and just see the whole level. So we would literally all sit in Kalani's office, John Knowles, like Harrison, other people, and just be staring at this level that I'd sort of printed out. And I would literally go into his office and tape it or use pins or whatever it was. And we would just be sort of imagining the player before it was even ready to play, right? Just like, what's going to happen here, and these enemies are going to come down and things like that. And so that was kind of my first. I was still in QA, but I was helping the art department with that kind of stuff. And I was learning Photoshop more and more on the outside, taking courses. David B. Edney, who I mentioned, who was a ILM guy, but just a Photoshop kind of luminary in the early days. And so I was just starting to learn those skills. And I think actually, I want to say chronologically, you can correct me, but I believe I moved to the art department first officially, which we can get into the story, to work on Sam and Max. Then when I was over there, Rebel Assault was being made. And Bill would ask me for help, basically, I think. And we would start, he was already doing experiments, and we were taking pictures of people and he was painting over them. And he was doing most of the work, but I was helping him in some capacity, which, was kind of the beginning of starting to experiment with video, right, in these games, but it was barely video then, right? It was like a few frames. And, and this is when the whole thing is just, the whole story to me is crazy. But when I think back on this and when we started to work on Star Wars games, just thinking it in context now and Disney and how official everything is, just the fact that they were letting this group of kids, make original Star Wars content with live action, literally taking pictures of ourselves and putting them into the games. And, I think, like, honestly, I watched your interview with Hal, and one thing he said that was totally eye opening to me, just the second he said it, was just like, oh, like, thanks. We kind of have our whole career to thank for the fact that George Lucas was really cheap. Right. And he didn't want to, like, he had this thing that happened with ILM. See, I didn't know that story and how he kind of got burned there. And he didn't want that to happen again. And sort of once he said that, I was like, okay. Like, and sort of that, my whole career there and things I was doing, I was like, why are you even letting me do this? And it was like, probably like, hey, he seems like he can do it. Let's give him a chance. And then we actually could pull it off. So they're like, okay, we don't need to go hire the big expensive firm to do this. These guys are doing a good job.
Well, you have to thank George Lucas for several things. First of all, the fact that he sold the license for video games, Star Wars video games, to a different company. And so you had to work on original IPs. I presume, as we can see with LucasArts, ever since they got their license back to create Star Wars games, they're focusing mainly on Star Wars games. But before they got their license back around 92, 93, the focus was more on games like Monkey Island and games like, Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle.
Sam and Max.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to hear that you created the layout for the levels in physical form. So you just create the tiles and then place them on the wall. And then you'd go back to the computer and use the same tiles to create the level on the computer.
Well, I didn't. They sometimes would want to change things. So they'd go, hey, go change this, or let's move this tile over here. And then I'd have to go tweak it and print it out. But that was sort of, I think, the blueprint for then to make sure the flow was right. Then the programmers would take over at that point and put it in the right order.
And how many unique tiles were there? Were there many, or was it all usually the same two tiles and the main difference was the enemies?
Well, there was a lot of the same parts used within these tiles, right? Like those tunnels, obviously usually all the same bottom, but they were always arranged differently in somewhat. I'm just trying to remember in my mind how many, like typically in a level I would tape up. It had to be at least 15, if not more. It would be this sort of crazy, this long thing, and then it would go up and come down and go way down and up. And yeah, it was always kind of fun to see it in that form.
And like you said, in my conversation with Bill Tiller, he talked about filming these new FMV scenes for the game. Did you take part in the recording of these scenes, or just the post-production?
Rebel 1?
Yeah, for Rebel 1.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say there was more photography than recording at that point. Did he say it was video? He may have better memory than
Well,
me.
he mentioned
If it was,
these are FMV scenes because one of the main selling points of Rebel Assault 2 was the fact that it was the first newly filmed footage for the Star Wars universe since Return of the Jedi at the time. So
right.
it blew
But
my mind.
we're talking 1 year.
Yeah,
That
and
was 2.
it blew my mind
Yeah.
when he said that on Rebel 1, he actually recorded new scenes for the cutscenes, and then he drew over them.
Yeah, that is totally true. I just can't remember if we did video, and I'm sure I was involved because it was video. I was usually doing it, and I know I was working with him on stuff, so that was probably what it was.
Okay.
Back then, and all these things we take for granted now, right? That are just you don't even think about. But just like back then, it was hard just to get files converted and get them onto the computer and have it looking good and transferred in the right color space and palettes, which we can talk about palettes.
Let's talk about palettes.
It was a big part of my job.
But given the fact that you didn't get to work on any EGA games, then the palettes you'd work with were $256. So that's something.
But it evolved quite a bit. Because when we started, right, the biggest thing was that there was 256 colors, I believe, throughout like the entire game or scene or whatever it was. And there was this one point, and maybe it was Rebel 2, it was a huge breakthrough. Vince, I think, did it with his compression that we were finally able to pull a palette per shot.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like epic moment, right, for the art department, art techs, because before this, everything was having to share. I remember this in Sam and Max actually now suddenly that like you'd have to pull from this palette that like and make something look good. And now suddenly like as that advanced, we could really dial in. And that's, when we were doing the dig and Jedi Knight, that it took a huge amount of work and like this program Debabbilizer, which we probably became one of the biggest users in the world. We would have like 5+ computers running scripts overnight on all these shots because like they would have to go through them frame by frame and sort of set this palette that we had created for each shot. So yeah, that evolved a lot over the years there.
And you can see that in the scans of the backgrounds for Monkey 2, in which, when you look at the actual concept art, then you see how detailed the backgrounds are and how many colors there are. And then you see it in the game. And as much as I love the game, you notice that it was dithered down in terms of colors and resolution in general.
Oh, yeah. And there were very crude tools to do that. That's a lot of what Photoshop made better, and there was just lots more tools to prepare the images before you downgraded them and smooth things out. And I was, always trying to sort of push new tools into the art department. And, when I got there, it was all D-Paint, right? I don't know if people have talked about D-Paint with you, but this was
Paint.
Yes. And that was an outside tool. And this is, all day, everyone's sitting there, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, making their animations with it. And it was a great tool. Everyone loved using it. And, there was at certain point, I think when I started, the games were 320, 200, and then they moved to, you probably know this better than me, but what did they move to after 320, 200?
320-200, they moved to 640 by 480 or 640 by 400.
I didn't know if there was something in between. Right, there's something in between it. But so at that point, D-Paint didn't. We're kind of jumping around now, timeline. But at this point, D-Paint didn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. This was like earth-shattering. So I remember there was a guy, Glenn Volk, and Pete Sakel mainly worked with him. I did a little bit too, and he wrote G-Paint, which became a higher res D-Paint, which went on to be used in multiple games there. There was a big fear we weren't going to have a new D-Paint because they weren't, apparently the product was dead at that point, so they needed to create their own.
Well, it's funny. At the same time that you guys were using the Scum system, they were using the Scum system at Humongous Entertainment as well. And they started working on the putt-putt games in 640 by 480 before you guys switched to 640 by 480 for the Curse of Monkey Island. So you guys were a bit behind.
Well, I remember vaguely with Humongous when they went up there, now that you're saying that. I mean, I think at Lucas they were more trapped in with Scum because there were games being made and they only certain changes they could make at certain times. And when Ron broke off, he had more freedom to just be like, hey, I'm going to sort of branch this off or whatever. And so he wasn't sort of hindered by things that were going on at the time.
From what I understood, you guys had an agreement with Humongous Entertainment that any advancements that they make to the Scum engine, you guys are getting for free. So
that sounds familiar.
I think we'll get to the dig, but I think that the dig was one of the main problems with switching to 640 by 480 because they were working on the dig for so long that they had to stick with 320 by 240 or 200 for the entire production. But we'll get to that. Still in 1993, you are also credited as a tester on X-Wing. What can you tell me about the testing process of this game as a Star Wars fan?
Yeah, that was an incredible memory, being able to, again, brought in towards the end. But we used to have to go up to Larry Holland's place in Fairfax. So driving these tiny hills, I saw Chris Brown describing them, and you get the idea. I won't go over that again, but it was just sort of magical driving up to this tiny little house. And that's, again, those guys I mentioned, Wotan, Mad Max, who I'd already known from the test bit. So they were sort of invited me with welcome arms, but it was a very small, intimate group up there, right? And, you know, these guys had been, and I knew him actually a little bit from Swaddle, of course, too, because that was, and there was another guy, I think we called him Captain, trying to remember his real name, but he was like an actual pilot or had flown, so we always would listen to him, you know, for certain things. But yeah, X-Wing was just a joy to test. I think they even named a couple freighters after me in there somewhere. And it's like Lewis and Clark in some of these games where, like, you know, you run out of names. We've named things after our wives, our kids, our grandparents. Okay, you back there. Okay, we'll put you in the game now. So yeah, it was cool. We used to like walk outside, take breaks out in the nature paths and whatnot. It was just a different feel than Kerner, which was much more urban. And when you walked outside Kerner, you never knew what you were going to see.
Still in 1993, you're credited as lead art technician. Actually, on the game, you're credited for graphics and art, but you were the lead art technician on 7 Max Cedar Road. What can you tell me about the production of this game?
Okay. And I wish I remembered more. But I do remember how it started, which was Jesse. Again, good friend of mine. He was the art tech on Day of the Tentacle, Jesse Clark. And he didn't want to be an art tech anymore. He wanted to be an animator. And so he needed someone to replace him. And I'd already been doing a little dabbling, as I said, in the art department. And he was kind of just like, hey, you'll be the art tech on Sam & Max. And I was like, I will? What's Sam & Max? Okay. I mean, I knew a little from the being an adventure and stuff, but I didn't know much, honestly. And so he trained me. They brought me over to the art department. And, you know, I've told this story many times. They, for reasons I do not understand to this day, they sat me next to Steve Purcell. Not like near him. Yeah. The entire project. I was here, he was right there. And, you know, my only theory is, and I asked him, he doesn't remember, but like, because I was the art tech, so all the art went through me before it went to the programmers. And maybe he wanted to see it before it went across the street to be butchered. No, so and just sort of like that last stop. So I don't even know why, but for whatever reason, they literally put me next to him, and it was Jesse was across the way animating. He quickly, I think, got carpal tunnel, sadly, which we all ended up, all of us getting and having lectures on about it, which I still try to sit properly to this day and use those things we learned. But yeah, like these are the main things I remember about Sam and Max, other than probably a few shots I could tell you here and there, because it was all a blur. I remember in the beginning, after a few months, there was like an initial pizza orgy test. I probably should. Am I allowed to even say that anymore?
Yeah.
So it's not politically correct. But and so I remember Jesse and I pulled an all-nighter, literally till like Mike and those guys got in, getting everything ready, for the pizza orgy. And I mainly just remember laughing. Steve Purcell, to the point where I would have to put on my headphones to get work done, because this guy was so funny. And, the thing is, again, I'm this East Coast guy, Steve, very California guy. But as we started to get to know each other, we kind of had a couple weird reference points that we hit it off on, like Planet of the Apes. And, I wouldn't know who Rick Baker was if it wasn't for Steve Purcell. And, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and just weird kind of stuff that I grew up with. Lost in Space. I mean, we would talk about that endlessly. And so we just sort of had, formed a friendship, was making it. And I've always stayed in touch with him over the years, and Colette, and just really an amazing person, and honestly, when I started on Sam and Max, even back then, just coming from like the East Coast and those sensibilities of sort of the type of comedy, right, that I grew up with, I totally didn't get Sam and Max at first. I was like, I didn't get the funny. But as I started to, read more in the comics, and just like, it just really started to blow my mind, just how, and broaden my horizon, I guess, on different types of comedy, and this was a much more geeky, intellectual sort of type of comedy, that you had to be very, you blink and you're going to miss a joke or a reference kind of a thing. And it's just very sort of Steve and Americana, and the Bigfoot stuff I connected with instantly. And yeah, it honestly, probably, if I had, like, if you put a gun to my head and said, what's the most fun project you ever had working on in games, it's probably Sam and Max. Like, I mean, that's why maybe we did Sam and Max, a few years ago. This time it's virtual, and got to talk about that later. But just getting to work with Steve and Peter and Mike again, it was just like a little bit of that magic rekindled again.
In my conversation with Steve Purcell, I said that it was his plan all along to get LucasArts to create a 7 Max game, given the fact that 7 Max became well known to the LucasArts fans through the adventure magazines, because you'd have the comic there would be an issue every quarter or so, and there'd always be a 7 Max comic and 7 Max merchandise, even before the game. So it seems like the next natural step to create a 7 Max game at LucasArts.
Yeah, they were kind of like the official mascots of LucasArts.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in other games, like, isn't there some Sam and Max reference in Monkey somewhere?
There is, and they had to remove it for the special edition.
Really? I didn't know that. No. Okay. Yeah, and I think, again, I've only heard the story secondhand, but I think it's really largely due to Kelly Flock, who I should have called out in that list. And again, one of the people I think who was in those early days, like the heart and soul of Lucas, like an executive approving a game like that, hats off to him, because he didn't have to do that, and he saw something there and saw this whatever cult thing brewing, or maybe he just liked it, thought it was funny. I don't know, but yeah, it just lucky it happened, and getting to work on it was just a blast. And that, it's probably how I got to know Larry better and Anson, because we were all working on it. Pete Sakel, because they were always coming over to me, bringing the shots to me. And that's also, so basically every morning on Sam and Max, we would have finished the shots the night before. I would always get in very early. This is how me and Peter Chan and I became friends, because we were the only two people in the art department at like 7 a.m. So he'd be drinking his coffee and drawing, and I'd go over and bug him and start talking to him, and he'd just keep drawing. Just like when I call him now, he just keeps drawing, But yeah, like, so that's how, so every morning I remember I would load up all of yesterday's shots onto my 3.5-inch floppy disks and literally have to walk them from Kerner B building to A building, because there's no network or internet. If there was, I probably wouldn't know what Mike Stemley looks like, and Sean, but I would go over there every morning, probably about 9 a.m. They had just gotten in. They generally didn't even want to see me at that point. Mike's like drinking his coffee. But yeah, I would hand him the discs. And sometimes, I would usually hang out to make sure they transferred okay and they could get them. And that's just how I got to know those guys, kind of hanging out there for half hour every morning, making sure the shots were okay. And sometimes they weren't. I had to go back and redo them.
Can you give an example of something that didn't work and you had to rework because... Wait, so first of all, you're talking about something that was approved by Steve Purcell, but wasn't approved by them or didn't transfer correctly?
Yeah, probably like more of a technical issue or something like that, or they couldn't put it in the game the way I had made it. I was using these very specialized SCUM tools, right, for the art. Basically, the process was, here's this beautiful piece of art and animation. My job was to cut it up into as many pieces as possible, right, to make it efficient and then put it all back together again. And reduce the palettes as well, right? Which I vaguely remember doing that part, and very restrictive again on like the amount of colors and stuff. So yeah, it was, to me, this time at LucasArts for me was really important for me, because this was when I started to get a better understanding of how things worked. Right, I started out in the test pit, and you have a limited understanding, but you're just really understanding it on a sort of high level. Oh, there's, again, remember, I knew nothing about how video games were made, and the truth is, most people there didn't. Right, like we were all making it up on the fly. Like I remember, like getting this job as an art tech. What's an art tech? Oh, well, it must be this. Blah, blah. And, now we look back, whatever, 20, 30 years later, and we realize like there were probably only like 3 art techs that alive at that time. Like we were inventing this job basically, and LucasArts was. So for me, like at this point, I was like, outside of those little experiment things and me still learning on the outside, I was learning what LucasArts' current internal processes were. And that was really important as we kind of moved past Sam and Max into kind of when I started to do more video stuff and R&D and that kind of phase. Because at certain points, basically after Sam and Max or towards the end of it, I sort of had this aha moment, and I've told the story a billion times, where I went to Colette and was just like, hey, let me show you using Premiere or After Effects or whatever I was doing. Like, I think I can do some of these things in like way less time. And again, like, this sounds so stupid now looking back, but you got to remember the era. Like, everything was done frame by frame, right? Like, there was no batch processing and things like that back then, and timelines, and even ILM. We used to go over there, and get lessons. And Sean, oh my God, Sean Turner, he should have been on that list too. But Sean Turner, someone who worked at ILM and was a big lead in the art department, and he'd worked on Roger Rabbit, and he took us over there and showed us how Roger Rabbit was. I still have cells somewhere from it, pictures, and with the little lines where they, and every, frame by frame, they would paint over stuff. So I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and started learning these tools, and it sort of just clicked for me. I was like, wait a minute. If we could actually use After Effects here for this shot, and we could just color the whole thing at once or animate it across all these series of frames, this thing that took several days, now we could do in like a few hours. So that kind of opened the door up to Rebel 2, really, and a lot of the R&D that happened before that. But now I'm jumping all over the place.
Now, you talked about video production, and in 1993, you also worked on a promotional LucasArts company reel. Now, I've shown this video in my conversation with Michael Land, in which he talked about scoring this promo video.
Oh, yes.
Let's watch a clip.
Oh, boy.
I'm in both businesses. I'm in the game business. I've been in the game business for 15 years. We've been developing interactive multimedia entertainment. And I'm a storyteller, and I make movies. One is not going to wipe out the other. They will coexist. People will always want to have a story told to them. And they will like to play games where you don't know the outcome and where you have some control over the outcome. I think there'll be movies and there'll be games. And the games will look like movies.
Stop now, before it's too late.
You'll be of no use, freelance police.
So, Dr. Jones, you fit right into my trap.
You'll fry like a pork sausage.
You can't stop me.
What possible harm could one insane mutant tentacle do?
I feel like I could. Like I could.
So this is the score I was talking about, the Michael Land score that he created specifically for this company reel video.
Yep.
So
we worked closely together on this. This was a big deal.
So what can you tell me about your work on this video?
So this is sort of, I'd been, again, experimenting with nonlinear editing. And I had convinced them to buy me some pretty expensive pieces of equipment, I think it was Media 100, not Avid. And, before this, I had been asked to actually be on the Skywalker Technology Council and got to sit on a bunch of those meetings. And this was, using these tools was a big deal to George. He was helping them design Avid and the controllers and things like that. And I just sort of was very attracted to it for whatever reason. And I was definitely doing stuff before this. I can't imagine they just were like, hey, here, do the whole company video. But again, it was back to one of these, I'm pretty sure that first part I just totally did on my own, with that George interview. And they were like, okay, he can do this. And I remember Hal coming and looking at it at one point. And I remember to this day, he's like, you could be an editor. You could have been an editor in Hollywood. And I was like, whoa, Hal Barwood's telling me that. Jesus, okay.
Well,
yeah, but it was a collaborative process. I won't lie. And I did watch it a couple days ago. I found it because I knew we were doing this. And just watching it now, and running my own company. One, it's just obscenely long. Like, I don't know why they let us make it that long. I do remember the original version was probably twice as long, but I also remember it was sort of this time at Lucas where all these amazing things were starting to be made, and they really wanted to show it off, like in one piece, like just have it all there. And I remember that video was probably worked on for like at least 2 months, where I was just in the back of the catacombs of the art department with my Media 100, and people would come back and see it. And I remember this vividly, that I took a vacation with my now wife to Hawaii. This was a good lesson. Never check your voicemail till you're fully back. I remember we were like in LA coming back to San Francisco, and I, just blissed out on this great vacation. I was like, maybe I should check my, we weren't as connected back then. This was the beginning of, I was like, let me check my voicemail. And there's this long voicemail from Colette, like, Mike, we got to make a lot of changes to this video. I'm like, what? Like, it had been done at that point. And I was like, oh God. So typical, went back in, re-edited all these different parts, tightened it up. And I remember Michael, I think it was Michael and maybe Peter, maybe two. And Hal and Mary, of course. Like, it was like, hey, let's tighten this part up. Let's move this here. But that was a great thing about nonlinear editing. It was like the blessing and the curse that it was so easy to change stuff and move stuff around. And so, yeah, they just, eventually we got it done. I remember working on it so long. I probably still have it somewhere. I would make like outtake videos of George. Like, do you know who Max Headroom was? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Max Headroom. Okay. I'm not dating myself. But so I would make like Max Headroom videos of George just being like, marketing, and just like making fun of him and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that video also, I mean, in some ways, I think that video is symbolic, with George talking, about how games will look like movies and movies will look like games, and that there was like this shift that started to happen at LucasArts. Looking back on it, and I'm absolutely one of the people, like many there, who got sucked into this, that I think this was kind of one of the downfalls of LucasArts. Okay, we're going to get deep here. We all loved movies. Everyone loves movies, right? And the games were getting more cinematic, and we had all these tools at our disposal. So of course we wanted to make we were making story-based games, right? So it was just sort of this natural evolution of like, let's make things look more cinematic, right? And I think in some ways, looking back on it, that was a mistake. Like, it wasn't a mistake to do that, but I think like we were all reading Shot by Shot by Steve Katz, who's a friend of mine. Like, we should have been reading books about game design, if that makes any sense, right? Like, I think, and I'm making blanket statements because there were obviously people, like I remember when we were making Jedi Knight, and Ray would always say to me, yeah, those are the cutscenes, whatever. There became more of a distinction, honestly, between them. Like, you think back to the adventure games, the cutscenes were at the beginning, right part of the game. Because they were so small. Like, a cutscene was like a quick little animation. But then as the tech evolved, it started to, now we're going to go to a full screen, cinematic kind of thing. And it sort of started to break from the game and sort of the cinematic part to it, And I think that's where, LucasArts, it started to shift, I think, in some of those games. It was too tempting to resist, right, in a way. And so, that became a big, big focus the last few years there, about just being as cinematic as we could be. We were almost making movies, at least I was, more than games.
Back then the motto was, don't embarrass George and don't lose money. But given the fact that you had to make the games more cinematic, then the budgets would have to grow. But usually with adventure games, which are still a very niche genre, you can't actually recoup the costs of a big budget adventure game. So you think this might have been the downfall of the adventure game genre?
Well, so my theory on the adventure game genre in general is it never died. It was just absorbed into other games, right? Like you play, it's kind of like Native Americans in religion, right? They wouldn't fight it; they would just absorb it into their own. And I think that's what happened with adventure games. You see the remnants of it in other games, right? With dialogue trees and games like KOTOR and things. That's where I was like, hey, wait, this is an adventure game, but it's not. And so you see the remnants of it. Obviously, there's still and always going to be like adventure game purists, but it's kind of like what you said. It unless you were going back to completely retro style, it just became, unmanageable. And it's then 3D came into it. It got even more expensive, right? Especially in those early days when it was so hard to deal with 3D. With Grimm, which I didn't work on, but I was there. It was just, that was just a weird like hybrid of 3D and 2D. Gorgeous hybrid, but very difficult to make.
And what other promotional videos did you get to work on during your time at LucasArts?
I mean, there was a span there for a few years. I kind of worked on everything. And I was also the guy, I was like, when marketing needed a video, they would generally, hey, Mike. And if I didn't make it, I would also like work with this outside company, and we would bring in this very expensive box, the RGB Spectrum, and we would sit there for hours capturing game footage. And I remember being proud of this because Mary would always say, Entertainment Tonight says our B-roll is, the quality is just beyond anything. And so the other games that they would get and whatnot. So yeah, that was something they would have me do for hours on end, just capturing the games. And sometimes I was editing them. Sometimes we were just sending them off to, Entertainment Tonight for them to work on or whatever. That was kind of like a side thing. I was kind of from time to time helping them on. And that's how I got to know Mary and Sue and Tom and those guys. So it was sort of like, yeah, I was always, unlike some people at the company who were very much like just working on one project, even though that was me during Sam and Max. After that, I was usually bopping around on a lot of things.
Now, speaking of the video captures of the game, I noticed that in the promotional video we saw, the in-game scenes are of higher quality than they are in the actual games. I mean, even the sound, the audio itself, seems to sound better than it does in the game. I mean, in the scene we just saw from Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, I can't hear the compression effects that I'm used to from the game itself. So did you guys use the actual recordings, the uncompressed audio from the DAT tapes for this promotional video? Did you use...
I want to say we did now that you're saying it. I mean, I know we were capturing it on the highest end machines possible at the highest resolution. We probably did go back to some of the source files and overdub it when we could. I cannot remember with any specificity. It was just, yeah, I just remember countless hours working on that thing. So there was a lot of changes made to it. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that. The quality did stick out with it. I remember showing it, I think, at a company meeting or whatever. Everyone was pretty jazzed up about it.
I mean, one of the nice things about this promotional video is that it's like a time capsule of how the games looked right before you shipped them and had to compress the audio and had to either the graphics and everything else. So this is how the games would have looked if computers...
And again, it's like back to, all these things are simple now, but like back then, that whole thing I was explaining with RGB Spectrum and having to convert, VGA to NTSC signals and getting the proper color channels and all that kind of stuff. It was not trivial to do. And, we luckily found a great vendor nearby in San Rafael who taught me a lot about how to, and we worked with them all the time. I remember I wanted to buy one of those boxes, but I don't think they would let me. But I'd probably convince them to buy. Because the thing is, a lot of this stuff, computers, most of the stuff, it didn't require like buying expensive things, which of course Lucas likes. But suddenly I was doing all this video stuff and nonlinear editing, and I'm like, I need to get this video capture card, and I need to get these giant hard drives to store all this stuff. And they were like, I remember being real loud, like, I have bigger hard drives than anyone at LucasArts, or like 5 gigabytes each or something. I mean, there was what were those things called? Jazz drives for a while. That there was a big, like, for a couple years. I remember I went to Macworld and I came back to Colette and I'm like, Colette, we have to have these. Like, this will change everything, because we just couldn't fit enough on whatever media we were using. So, and again, you had to walk everything back and forth in those days. Kept us in shape.
Yeah. And who was in charge of choosing which scenes would make it into the promotional video?
I think that one, the one we were just looking at, I mean, the big one, I mean, the best of my memory is I kind of took a first pass at it. There were probably some people helping me, friends, at the time, with all this footage we had. But I remember Michael and Mary and others coming in. I can't remember much about like, oh, we need to add this scene. Maybe there was some of that. I remember a lot of like just tightening it up a lot. I mean, again, this was the first major thing like this I'd ever edited. The fact that they even let me do it it's kind of a miracle. So I was very open, when they wanted to change things, and Hal is making edit suggestions. I'm going to listen, when I'm like 23 years old. So, and he'd made Dragon Slayer, which I loved. So I was like, okay, we'll do that. Yeah, but it was, I just remember it took a lot longer than you think it would have taken to make, because there was definitely a lot of emphasis on it and they wanted to use it for a lot of things. Again, I think it's obscenely long looking back on it, but it is like this, it's kind of nice to have that now.
Well, you did an amazing job on this promotional video, and I watch it every now and then because, again, it's a great time capsule. And so it surprises me to hear that this is the first commercial edit, you'd say, that you worked on.
Pretty much. I can't imagine. Maybe I'd done a couple things before that to give him confidence. And again, like, I look back on some of these things. I mean, same thing now, right? I guess when I hire someone who's young and it's like, hey, he's doing a good job. Let him keep going. He's kicking ass. And so, yeah, if they hated it, they probably would have brought someone else in.
Now, as a very FMV oriented channel, I wanted to talk to you about 2 canceled FMV projects you worked on as video R&D lead. The first one being the unreleased Indiana Jones video project. What can you tell me about this project?
Oh, yeah, that was a very big deal. Hold on, let me see. I did have some stuff for you, I promised you.
I'm excited. I should have brought popcorn.
It's so funny how tiny these things are, too, now. I'll have to make them bigger here. So let's see. I'll share my screen. So, yeah, this is kind of... I don't know if these have been seen really publicly. I hope no one cares. But, so yeah, we worked on this for probably 4 to 5 months. And I actually just was talking with Bill Stoneham about it because I wanted to fact check myself, being a former journalism major. And yeah, you've never seen this?
No.
Yeah.
Probably no one has.
Nope. Luckily, I don't throw anything out. I have so many other files I can't even open now, but I should talk to Eric or someone who could probably help me. But yeah, I had to honestly talk to Bill because I couldn't remember, and I'd read stuff also how, this was like part of, I think it was called like the Philosopher's Stone before it was Iron Phoenix. And this was really like a big moment for me because all these tests I'd been doing kind of led to us doing this R&D test to prove, like, this is really what paved the way for Rebel 2, right? And then later Dark Forces. And we actually convinced them, here, let's go to the next one. That's only part 1. Wait, I got part 2 here.
Oh my God.
We can watch that again.
This is so
we'll
exciting. Let's rewatch this for the entire interview.
Yeah, and we can watch it again. And then, so basically, like, we convinced ILM, the first thing we did actually was, for some reason, ILM had this gargantuan blue screen, what do you want to say, a treadmill, a blue screen treadmill. I mean, the thing was monstrous, okay? And they didn't need it anymore. And I think we paid like $10,000 for it or something, which was a lot of money back then. And I convinced them to buy it. And because remember, we were making adventure games. So none of this is even in this, but where we started was we were shooting actors walking on the conveyor belt on a blue screen to see if we could do an 8-way walk cycle with it. And we had that all working, I think, in like early test versions of, like, maybe it was the Dig or something like that, like where we actually got that working. That I can't find any footage of. And then here, let's go to the next one here.
So exciting.
And yeah, wait, here we go. And so, I guess Bill, as far as he explains to me, he'd been working with Joe Pinney on this indie game with Eric, and I didn't have any involvement of that. And I think, like, I'd seen online too that this is kind of associated with Eric, but I think he'll tell you, he had no involvement in this at all. This was really me, Bill Stoneham, Ralph Girth was working on it, Gary Gaber, and Dave Grossman. Dave Grossman wrote all of this. Unfortunately, I don't have the audio anymore. I wish I did. It's silent. But yeah, and this was a big test, and so we got these actors, which must have been done through Tamerlan or Chris Brown. I do remember, like, reviewing, headshots and things like that at one point, but there was probably a whole committee of people. It wasn't like I was choosing who the actors were going to be, and Dave was involved in that. And yeah, then we had a shoot. I think we shot it at ILM, I want to say. And then we got all the footage, and it was up to us to put it all together and compress it, make it 8-bit. And then when it was done, and this was like, in my 7 years at LucasArts, George came down to visit, 4 times, and 2 of them were to see stuff like this that we were working on. So that was pretty cool. And since this was, and again, you got to remember the environment at the time. Like, this was around here, I'll stop sharing, but games like Seventh Guest had come out, if you remember that. Okay. And Wing Commander at some point in there, right? The one with Mark Hamill. And, we're LucasArts. We got George. We should be into this, right? Like, there was definitely a corporate top-down interest in this stuff. And so when we finished this test, it was like George wanted to see it. And was like, holy shit, okay. And if he liked it, the idea was he was going to bring in Harrison Ford, and this was going to turn into live action. But yeah, no. But he saw it, and he was right. He took one look at it, and he's like, this ain't ready for Harrison Ford. Or Harrison Ford ain't ready for 8-bit. And he was right. It was too crude back then. And so that probably was before Mark Hamill, honestly, was in Wing Commander. But then, that happened, and that sort of this momentum really around wanting to do something more cinematic kind of came into play. And then, Rebel 2 kind of, then I was sort of going to be on it in the beginning, but then I ended up not being on it. And that kind of project took a life of its own and started using all these techniques. Mark, who kind of I had brought in and hired, with Colette, who I had met on the outside, led that. And yeah, they did a great job. I mean, Hal, it was like the first time we'd ever done anything like that. So there was so much stuff that had to be figured out. And I was really, working on other stuff at the time. But it was, I remember, I probably have them somewhere because I remember in the early stages of it, seeing the first set of storyboards that Vince had drawn, for Rebel Assault. And Hal got a look at those and was like, you guys need to go watch Star Wars and take real close notes at the way shots are framed and how you're seeing the characters' faces in the cockpits. Like, everything is done. I remember him saying this. Every shot is done for a reason, for a specific angle. And then, so the second version of those boards, were just a whole new, game at that point. And so, yeah, that was kind of the beginning of that. And then kind of as that was winding down, probably somewhere in there, that's when, I think we're skipping over the dig and other things, but that's when Jedi Knight really, first we worked on the first one, right? Somewhere in there. That was, am I skipping ahead too much?
You're skipping ahead.
I'll sit back. I'll stop and shut up and let you lead.
So these are the only two shots you have from the Indiana Jones video project?
I found, let's see here. I did find these right before, seconds before this started, and I haven't had time to go through them all. But I do have the original shots before we did the comps and put in all the different things and, the props. So I do have all of these somewhere.
And these are screenshots, or this is an actual video?
No, these were the original images that we used to then make those shots. And remember, back then, a lot of the times we were using exabyte tape and working with John Knoll, and using his, what was it called? Missing Link, the exabyte tool that he had. And that was something, so everything basically we had still frames of also, and then we would turn it into movies sometimes to work on, basically. So that's, I have some more of that, but that's, and I do have probably storyboards and stuff like that from it as well, but that's pretty much what I got there.
Well, feel free to share.
Hopefully 30 years later, no one cares.
No one cares. No one's Disney's not watching this.
Well, we know people care. Just yeah, those people.
No, I'm just saying it as a disclaimer. I know everyone cares.
What could have been?
Exactly. When you watch, for example, a Blu-ray of a movie from the 2000s and you watch a deleted scene from that movie, then it's not as exciting as watching a movie from the 90s or the 80s in which you see a deleted scene that you haven't seen that hasn't been released for 30 years. And, it's much more exciting. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to save video files and then use them as either for the director's cut or the behind the scenes or the extra content on the Blu-ray. But back then, no one would save things that haven't made it into the actual final product. So the fact that these things remain is mind-blowing.
Yeah, I tried to save as much as I could. At least that was be readable. But yeah, it makes me think when I was growing up, and I don't know who told me this. Maybe I learned it from Hal or someone. But when they show movies on TV, right? The editors would get outtakes that weren't in the movies because they had to retime it for the commercials. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what you're talking about. So oftentimes you would be seeing a movie you'd seen many times before, and then you see it on TV, and there's this scene in it you've never seen. You're like, what is going on? And if you're a fan of that movie, it's oh my God, this is like gold.
Exactly. They either use outtakes to make the movie either shorter, or they'd have to use outtakes because they would have to bleep out a curse word for the TV edit, or various reasons why they would use deleted scenes, or they'd have to make the movie longer because the commercials were you could add more commercials if the movie was 2.5 hours instead of 2 hours.
Yeah, or they just had to extend the scene a little bit to hit the timing of the commercial point. And so, yeah, there was, it's harder with games probably with that stuff, because if it doesn't actually end up in the game, it's no, like there are these things, you're not going to see them.
Yeah, in games, what we have, or what's exciting to see, is the uncompressed footage from FMV games or the uncompressed audio from the adventure games. So, for example, when they remastered Day of the Tentacle and Grim Fandango, they went to the Lucasfilm archives and took the original DAT tapes. And these are things that weren't done at Sierra. So getting uncompressed footage is a big deal. And seeing uncompressed footage from a game that was canceled is an even bigger deal. So is this all you have from the Indiana Jones video project?
Boy, what do you want? Yes, that's it. That was the whole thing.
Okay.
That was the entire scene we did. That was it, actually. Yeah, there was a lot of shots, basically, back then. We were learning how to do them. But I think it did turn into something playable, that was on a PC that we could all watch.
So there was actual gameplay?
No. I think click it to activate it. It was just a cutscene. I don't think there was any actually dialogue trees or anything like that.
Gotcha. Now, the second canceled FMV project is Hal Barwood's unreleased project, Rapid Transit. What can you tell me about this project?
Well, you're jumping way ahead now. That was sort of towards the end, as right when I was about to leave LucasArts. And I actually, hold on, more props, because I was going through my stuff. So I wanted to prove I'm not making this up. This is real. I'm not making this up. I didn't even know I had that till about 10 minutes before this started. But yeah, that was just a project that Hal wanted to do. It was after Dark Forces, I think, and Dark Forces 2, because he wanted to do something with video. It involved I could read it. I probably remember more, but it involved aliens and BART, the subway system in San Francisco. So on at least 2 occasions, I remember Bill Stoneham, Hal, and I went over with my video camera, because again, hey, what's happening? Video, and went over to the East Bay, went down into the BART, and we shot all this footage. I remember Hal lean over more. I'm like, Hal, I don't want to fall into the into the BART, fall down. But yeah, we were just capturing all this different footage, and we did some tests with it, and eventually it didn't go anywhere, or I left, or I don't know what happened with it. But it was a pretty cool idea. I remember that, and I was excited about it. But I think it must have been shelved for him to move to work on something else or whatever, but it was going to be a lot of full motion video.
So you don't have any footage from that project?
No, I mean, not that I found. I probably do somewhere, because, I have all kinds of stuff I have stuff on 8mm tape too that I need to see. In the very early days, again, I used to get to do stuff I got to go to CES very early, because I was had a video camera. So it was hey, you come to CES with us and you shoot everything, and then we'll edit it. Maybe I'd done that before the company really, to show people, because this was before E3. CES was, where games were shown back then. And this is why I always thank Colette to this day. I got to shake Larry Bird's hand at CES.
Wow.
She was standing with me at CES, and it was the year Larry Bird versus Jordan came out or something. And, me being from Boston, all of a sudden, we're outside and the sea parted, and literally Larry Bird is walking right towards me. And I said, Colette, I'm going to embarrass you right now, but I have to do this. I just walked up to him and I was just I'm from Boston. I got it his way. I'm I'm from Boston. You have to shake my hand. And he did.
Well done. Was she embarrassed?
Oh, very. She probably turned away or turned red or something. But, you know, I embarrassed Colette plenty of times.
So before we talk about Full Throttle, you had to change your shirt because the conversation got too hot to handle.
I'm the David Lee Roth of LucasArts interviews. I'm going to change my outfit 4 more times before we're done.
You're like the Lady Gaga of LucasArts.
Oh, God, yes. Don't make me put the fez back on.
Now, in Full Throttle, which was released in 1995, you're credited for additional compositing and editing. What compositing and editing was done on this game, and what was your additional contribution to that?
So on Throttle, and this is where, like, I think Larry and I started to get really tight. I'm pretty sure in Throttle, you know, the entire opening cutscene, we pre-edited that, like in nonlinear editing, and sort of we were basically doing pre-viz before the term existed. So we were kind of made sure it all worked before it was done, basically. And then I'm pretty sure also that the opening shot where it pans down, I think I did that in After Effects, because that was hard to do back then, those kind of panning shots. And that, I know I did it in the dig, that big opening shot where the huge, you know, and like, because Bill and Peter would paint these amazing kind of paintings that sort of, if you pan down, the right angle and parallaxing would happen at the right time. And so, you know, in Full Throttle, that first shot, it kind of pans down.
I know the reason why I'm making this face is because I know that this image is an image of, it is vertical scrolling of one image. So it wasn't in After Effects.
We might have pre-vizzed it in After Effects, but we definitely did it that way in the dig.
I presume that you may have pre-vizzed it because when you look at the image, then you see all of the various angles of the road according to the panning of the camera. And this was probably done in order to know how to draw it. So the previous was probably necessary because if you look at the image, it kind of looks weird because the road looks, you know, the angle changes as you look down that image.
About. Yeah, that distortion that they paint into it, which is hard to do. Yeah, so I mean, and then I think we were also, like the compositing was just putting a bunch of the shots together. I think there was some like FMV kind of cut scenes in there. So it was for those kind of scenes I definitely worked on it a little bit.
Awesome. And still in 1995, you were credited for cutscene video effects on Dark Forces. First of all, what can you tell me about the production of this game?
Well, Dark Forces 1 was similar to Rebel 1, honestly, I think, where was working with either Justin or Bill. And again, like this was like that's the thing, is like the technology, every single game was getting a little bit better. So we were pushing it, you know, to do as much as we could. And this was, I think, in Dark Forces 1, we digitized footage from Star Wars, if I'm remembering this correctly, like Jabba the Hutt, and was Akbar in that too. And again, like, what are we doing? Like, how are they letting us do this? Like, we're just capturing it, you know, on a Radius. I think it was, what was it called? Radius Vision, Video Vision. And that was another one of these boards. It was the first board that I would always, whenever there was like a Macworld, I would come back or some conference and tell Colette, like, we have to buy this. And so that was kind of I think what we were using there to bring in those images. And then we would compress them and have to remove so many frames, and probably Bill or someone was working on them. And so they were like these limited, you know, little videos within a still background, right? And we were doing like the hologram effects, I think, right? Like when they would talk to them in the ships, and just like general, I think even like cutting up some of the mouth frames and things, so when the characters could talk and things like that. It was again like just That was the beginning of this stuff. And like, I think that, if my memory is correct, like that happened really before we did like that indie test and things like that. That was sort of the next step to that stuff. And like, you know, after that really was when, and I watched Clint's interview, which was great. I love Clint, some of it. You know, I never would have known what his first day at LucasArts was like if I didn't watch your interview. Like, oh, okay, now that makes sense why your eyes were going in two directions now. But I got to start to be really friendly with people from ILM. Those guys I mentioned, Dan, and I would go over there all the time. Like I would just wander over there, and because what was happening, and then that turned into Skywalker Ranch because they were also making Young Indiana Jones. And this, you know, this is all standard right now in Hollywood. We take it for granted, but back then, this was like the beginning of like, can we shoot a large part of this movie on blue screen and compositing? Like this had never been done. And so they would invite us up to the ranch and see what they were doing. And we were like, okay, we can do this too. And like we were learning from them, and we were like, how can we do this in 8-bit world? You know, how can we take this beautiful celluloid film, you know, and get it down to where it looks decent enough, you know, that it's, you know, can be represented and put out by Lucas, you know, and that was the best, you know, at that time. You look back at it now, you kind of wince and you're like, oh my God, how did they let us do this? But again, you know, I've heard some of your interviews. It's like, it's just back then, it's just hard to imagine that just even seeing this stuff play on a PC was mind blowing, you know, and this was also like in this era, right, when QuickTime came out on Macs. And, you know, most of Lucas was PC. Okay, I didn't know anything about PC before I worked there. DOS, star.star, what's that? Oh, okay, don't do that. And I learned all about that. But then once I started to do my stuff in the art department and photo, it was very much like driven. PCs couldn't do this stuff back then. I don't even think Photoshop was out on PC at that time, right? That's why I needed a Mac to practice. And so that ILM, you know, they were using all these same tools. Even, you know, at the time, they were using SGIs, right? And these huge computers to do Jurassic Park. There was this group within ILM and at the ranch who, you know, and John Knoll, sorry. Can't go get right 30 years later. But John Knoll leading the charge, of course, who I think did the first all Macintosh shot and models, you know, in Star Wars movies. There was a group within there that knew these tools eventually would be good enough to do. And we were right at that point, you know, where they didn't need these expensive SGI machines anymore. So, especially for the compositing. And so there was definitely like huge inspiration from learning and seeing what they were doing. And then, you know, like I said, QuickTime kind of was at the center of all that. I remember once we had a whole big meeting with the music department, and they were just like, what is QuickTime? Like, explain it to me. And I was just like, you know, I had just come back from Macworld. QuickTime at this point was, you know, literally this big on your screen, like a stamp. But we knew it was going to like change everything, basically, like in terms of letting us just work with moving images, right, as opposed to stills at a time. So yeah, I remember trying to explain it to them. This was like, you know, again, this was before Google. I couldn't go back to my desk and, you know, I was like, wait a minute, let me go get you that pamphlet I got from Macworld. But I just remember it was really tricky to explain because it was software, but it was also related to hardware and just new forms of media. And it was very foreign to everyone there.
It's a good thing you didn't use QuickTime for any of the LucasArts projects, because a lot of the games that are QuickTime based can barely run nowadays unless you create a virtual machine of a Windows 95 computer, and some games can't even run on Windows 98, so you have to create a Windows 95 virtual machine get it to run. So I'm sure that,
I was probably pushing for that at the time, but they were smart enough not to let us. And we had Vince's, built-in compression system, which we used for years on all those games. And I jumping ahead, but when we made Dark Forces 2, that was the first time we didn't use Vince's compression. That was a big deal because I pushed for. There was an outside company who still exists, but it's not their main business anymore. But I just was like, I showed Colette, and I was like, "This is better than what we have. Like, this doesn't cost that much. Let's use this." And that was like a big departure for us to be able to use this new tool, and that's why I think the cutscenes in Dark Forces look so much better than Rebel 2.
And do you remember which cutscenes you worked on in Dark Forces?
1?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, again, it was what we were talking about, the Jabba stuff. I remember Admiral Akbar and what's the female? There's a female admiral as well who talks a lot. I forget her name, but I remember working on her shots too. Those are mainly what I remember. I think it was only a handful of shots.
Now, since you've already watched some of my previous conversations, I assume you're well aware of my affinity towards The Dig. And in this game, you are credited as the lead effects technician. What can you tell me about your work on this game and the animation system you developed for the animators?
Which I didn't get credit for.
True.
So when we made, so here's my memory of The Dig. When we made The Dig, had obviously been trying to be made in the background for years. We would see shots and the rotoscoping and all these different experiments. And at this point, they had hired a bunch of new animators, really good animators. Not that we didn't have good animators, but the animators who had come from film. Chris Green, who was a great guy, and Gordon, forgetting his last name, but they both worked on Nightmare Before Christmas and other big films. And so they came in, saw what we were doing for animation, and they were just like, "Oh no, this is not going to cut it. Like, we won't work on this like this. We need something more traditional." And there were just beginning of these types of digital animation systems emerging. I remember we looked at it. I want to say one was called like Toontown, maybe, or no, that was a show, Toon something. And it was very expensive. And I just remember saying to Colette, like, "Give me a couple weeks. I think I can jury rig something together." And literally, and I remember working with Anson, I think, a lot on it, like him coming in and testing it and going like, "Is this good enough now?" And literally just like using, again, like probably that video card I mentioned before, the Radius Video Vision, I think we were using then, because it could do higher res. And we set it up like, on a art table where we had like a video camera looking down on it, and the right kind of lighting. So we got rid of all the sort of schmutz that you would capture normally. That's a technical word, schmutz. And basically created a system where they could, because they wanted to draw, right? They wanted to hand draw their cells and then scan them in, basically. And then from there, color them. That's kind of what animation was moving towards at that point. And so, yeah, again, maybe thanks to Lucas being cheap and me getting an opportunity to experiment. And I mean, the bottom line was they weren't going to use it if the animators didn't like it and it wasn't good enough. So Anson and then these other guys were like, "Yeah, this is good enough. We'll use this. Like, this works. This is better than asking us to draw it digitally, because that was just not going to fly." And that's why, like, The Dig has better line quality, and I'm pretty sure that was a moment where we did go up in res, right? I think.
No, Full Throttle, which came out earlier that year, it would still use the lower resolution, but they'd have bigger characters and cinematic cutscenes, while the Dig, since they worked on it since 1990, 1981, it was still low res, and the characters themselves, they were similar in size to what he used in Monkey Island 2, for example, and not in Full Throttle. But both of them had still the lower resolution, while Curse of Monkey Island was the first one to have a higher resolution.
Okay. But the difference with Throttle and the Dig was Throttle was all the art was drawn digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dig, I think you saw that finer line quality of the characters, the thinner lines, and all, that was due to them drawing it in basically and scanning it and being able to color it that way. So yeah, so I did that, at the very beginning. This was typical of me at Lucas. I did it at the very beginning of the project. A year and a half later when it came to ship and the credits were on Sean's wall, and I was like, wait a minute. You remember I did this a year ago? Like, oh yeah, no, just take it for granted then. So yeah, that all the animation was that tool was used for basically to get into the game. But then after that, myself and my team of Andrew Nelson and Bill was helping, Tiller as well, and Chris Ross, I think, is he credited on that? I think he worked too. That kind of became our little video group, and we worked a ton on the Dig. I know we worked a ton on that opening cutscene, and that again was one of the first times like we were incorporating real footage. I mean, I remember finding that footage and the NASA, the space shuttle stock footage. We had to buy it. If it was today, we just would go to some internet, download it. No, that took like weeks. It finally came or something on a drive or whatever, and yeah, just trying to get the shot to look as good as possible, and mix in kind of video with animation. But we did a ton of other shots in that game. There was all those puzzles with the symbols, right? That would morph and change. So if you remember, there was this brief moment in Hollywood where morphing was the thing, right? I worked on the Academy Awards one year, that same year, where they morphed all the stars at the beginning. I got to work on a few of them with ILM, and so we were morph crazy at that point. We wanted to. I have these old files. I wish I could read them, where I was like morphing Bernard into Guybrush and just doing weird morphing experiments. So yeah, when it came time to do those puzzles and there were all those symbols, we're like, oh, we could morph all the shapes and have them blend in between. And so I just remember there were so many combinations of them, right? So we just had to do so many versions of them. And there were lots of other shots we worked on, like the what we used to call it the Snoodeel, the lizard, right? That would come, and that was 3D. And that I'm pretty sure was made by Ralph, who works with me now, my current company, which I'm obviously pimping this whole interview. But yeah, so we've talked about that, and I'm pretty sure he did that shot. And I just remember it was so hard to just, incorporate 3D in 2D back then. It was, and have it look good.
I always thought that the visual effects in this game were truly stunning. And can you clarify which parts were created by ILM and which parts were created by the people at LucasArts?
Oh, ILM did almost nothing. That was in the earlier versions of the stuff they did. Most of that stuff, you'd have to remind me and I'd have to see it, but I don't think most of that stuff was used in the final version. Do you have anything to show me? You could trigger my memory.
I can show you parts from the game, but I wanted you to clarify which parts were created by ILM and which by LucasArts, but now you're saying that none of the cutscenes or animation.
I know ILM did stuff, but I think in the final version, most of that stuff was redone. Remind me what they did. Show me.
I don't know. I'm asking you.
Oh, okay.
The only reason why I'm mentioning ILM is, first of all, they're credited in the credits, And second of all, they used ILM in the marketing of the game. They would say that the visual effects were created by ILM.
Sure.
But in the end, it seems like it was created by you guys.
Yeah, I think that's mainly true.
Okay.
I'd have to really go back and look at it to say with certainty, but that's my memory.
Well, you're invited to a text play session of me and you playing the Dig all the way through.
Oh boy, I do have a couple of Dig things here. You want to see them?
Interview over. You take over. Show me.
This is. I mean, you may have seen this stuff. You may have seen this stuff. This is. I just dug this up. So this must have been some book we had it in, but these were like. Have you seen these?
No. Wow.
Yeah, these are storyboards to the Dig.
This is the first part when they
right, and you see it's 94, so this is when we were making it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this came from the earlier versions. Wait, here's the last one. Look familiar?
Yeah. No. Oh, okay. So this is when Brink dies.
Yeah, somewhere I have this whole book. These are just ones I found that I digitized. Yeah.
I can give you my address. You can send it over.
Wow, you like the Dig. I also, wait, what's this? Well, of course I have this. You must have seen this. This is just probably, sheepish to show off, but why not? We all got these at the end of the Dig. Have you seen these?
Yeah, Steven Spielberg thanking you guys for the Dig.
Still hanging on my wall over there.
They're diggers.
Something to show the kids. And I still have my Dig box they gave us of all the cool goodies. Yeah, I dig the Dig, all those things. I told you, I don't throw anything out.
Well, wait, what goodies? I thought you had the big box.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay, so the big box is what we have as well. Did you get anything?
Like the promotional kit. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the actual big box I bought in the store.
Oh, yeah, no. I have that too. This was like a promotional thing they sent out.
And
you never seen that?
No.
You might have to give me a break and I could find it. I may have a picture of it too. I thought I did. Oh, yeah, here you go. Okay, here you go. I got you.
Now we're talking.
I can't remember anything, but I've saved everything. So that, yeah, this was the contents of the Dig, like, promotional box. And it was like the book by Alan Dean Foster, Mince.
Yeah, with the fourth character.
Yeah, astronaut ice cream and some other things underneath there. Yeah, I have this somewhere.
Wow. I envy you.
I'll leave it to you in my will.
Now, since you started working at LucasArts in 1991, which is around the same time they started working on the previous iterations of the Dig, I have to ask, did you get to see parts or play around with any of the previous iterations of the game?
I don't think we ever tested it, but I definitely saw it. We would see it all the time. And, when we go over to the art department and like Larry was working on it at one point, and it was interesting to me also just because of the rotoscoping that they were doing. So I thought that was like, it was relating to some of the stuff I was learning about and connection to video. And I just thought it looked cool. So yeah, like, and the other thing too, when I started on the Dig and I going through my memory banks, like I am pretty certain like Sean was not the project leader. He came in like a month later, and because I think it was like a transition period. So we were kind of already working on it, when he came on board. And I remember being very fired up when we started working on it because we knew it had failed. multiple times. And this was just like my personality back then, and probably now. I just remember getting in with my guys and just like, we're going to finish this game. We're going to be the team that finishes this game. And it was just sort of like on a mission. I think all of us were. And Sean, honestly, like, he was the guy to get that game done. You know, like, he was the perfect guy to come on, no bullshit, like, we're making this game.
And was there any content you worked on for the game that was ultimately cut?
I don't know. I can't remember. Probably, but if it wasn't up to us. We were pretty efficient, honestly, back then too. Like, as you saw with the boards, like, everything was planned out. You know, if something got cut, it was probably due to like a technical issue.
And what tools did you use for the visual effects? Was it Adobe Premiere and After Effects?
Yes, mainly After Effects. We didn't use Premiere for much back then. It was crude. Now you can do stuff in Premiere, like half the things you can do in After Effects, you know, but like, I mean, we were literally, you know, we were working with the creators of those tools. There was a programmer we hired for a short time at Lucas. Adobe wrote it for us. What am I talking about? He was a Premiere. He wrote, you know, that we were working and they were doing special stuff for us. It was pretty cool. So he wrote I think like a QuickTime to Flick exporter, because that was the format we used for everything, was Flick.flc. These are the ones I can't read on my computer right now. So yeah, that was like, we were working very closely with Adobe and got to know the After Effects original guys, the Daves, and, you know, we were working with it when it was called COSA before it became After Effects, Company of Science and Art. And when they put in the blue screen feature and compositing and all that, like, we were testing all the alpha versions and giving them feedback on it and just seeing, you know, if we could use it in our production flow. And that was a big deal, just learning After Effects and, you know, trying to see, you know, sort of squeezing it in anywhere we could. That's why we were like doing the morphing and kind of, you know, like those pan shots. And that's why my memory is blurry and Full Throttle. But I just remember, like, we knew we could do those so much smoother in After Effects. And like, just those little subtle things like easing in and easing out versus just like a hard pan and little things like that. And I remember on the dig too, in that opening cutscene, and Bill again was working side by side with us, but it was the first time like we started to do like parallaxing, right? Like there's that scene when you go in and everything kind of, the leaves and things move away. Like, we'd never been able to do that before. So that was like, ooh, again, we're little movie makers.
It's amazing to see how these classic games and classic movies are responsible for many of the things we take for granted in Adobe software. So, for example, in The Abyss, in James Cameron's The Abyss, they used the first version of Photoshop to add the shadows for the water morph. So you guys were working closely with Adobe to actually add features that you guys needed for the games and make them features that are now, you know, the basic features of Photoshop and After Effects.
If you remember the movie Hook, remember that? That was like a big deal at the time, because it was kind of the sort of an evolution of digital techniques being used in that. And I remember, because that's when I was learning Photoshop from David Biedny, who did multiple shots in that movie. But everything in that movie was done frame at a time in Photoshop, right? Like there's a scene on the bridge when the couple floats up and the snow's floating. That's actually Carrie Fisher and George Lucas. I don't know if you knew that. Like, it was like before digital rights, and I think they float up and float away. But like David Biedny had to do that entire shot frame by frame in Photoshop. And so I was always like, I was very lucky, I felt, when I got to learn Photoshop for him. And this was like before After Effects, because this was like before you could just click a button and pull a matte. Like I actually had to learn color math, right? And RGB and channels and adding and subtracting, all of which I forgot at this point. But I'm glad like I had that basis, right? So at least I have a understanding now, and I'm just like, click, blue screen, gone, perfect matte. Like, okay, I know what they're doing behind the scenes there, because that's literally how we were doing it in those early days when we were doing it on Rebel Assault 1 and all those like sort of still things. That's how we were pulling mattes.
I remember that in Hook they used 3D projection on the island when Robin Williams would fly over the island. So it was a 2D image, and they somehow did 3D projection or 2D projection on the 3D image. And that was amazing.
Yeah, they used to do stuff like that with the matte paintings, right? Is that what you mean? And they would, project like things onto the matte paintings and things.
Now, I know it's become a running joke at this stage, but I have to ask, did you enjoy working on the dig?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for us, like I said, we were on a mission, and just to see it get done and it all come together, see it come out, get good reception. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty enjoyable. I mean, usually with our role, we were done before the programmers were done, right? Like we would finish our shots early, so move on to the next project. But I only have pretty happy, positive memories of working on it and just getting to sort of. So no one else does.
I've been waiting for the past year and a half. I've been talking to so many LucasArts people. Everyone hates the dig. Everyone. Except for Michael Land, because he got to work on the dig separately. He got to work on the soundtrack, and so he wasn't actually part of the production. He would work on the score, and that's it. But everyone else hated working on the dig. Everyone. Except for you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't think I think if you asked anyone who worked on our team, did Bill Tiller say that?
Well, he worked on several on the previous iterations, so he was frustrated by the fact that a lot of his work wasn't used. He became the lead artist in the final version, but at that point in time, he wanted the project to end. I also talked to Anson Jew, and a lot of the work he put into Noah Falstein's version and Brian Moriarty's version weren't eventually used in so people were frustrated with the dig, and it pains me to hear it.
That's why they needed to bring in us and guys like Sean, right? Like they needed fresh blood on it. They needed people who didn't have that baggage. I think that those guys had a little bit. I don't remember Bill being too frustrated. I think, but yeah, it's a long time ago, and I just remember excitement that we're actually doing things and getting it done, and that this was like sort of the starting us to flex our muscles a little bit with some of these effects and techniques that we were experimenting with up to then that we could actually use.
Well, again, thank you for that answer. You made my day.
No problem.
In 1996, you got special thanks on Neo Hunter. What can you tell me about the production of this game?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay.
What's Neo Hunter?
A game that you got special thanks on.
LucasArts put it out?
No.
Oh,
Virgin Interactive put it out.
Wow. I have no idea what that game is. See, I get credit for games I didn't work on and not credit for the ones I did work. I don't remember this. Nope. Not me. Some other Mike Levine.
Okay. In 1996, you got special thanks on Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. What did you do exactly to earn this prestigious special thanks? And furthermore, can you explain exactly how it came to be that Lebo 2D9 was named after you?
Yeah, well, that's probably why I got the special thanks. Although maybe I was always helping them, probably little things now and then. And Tom Harper, who I mentioned on that list, who's still a friend today, unbelievable human being, and he came in sort of for that project with that team. It was a great team, like very sort of like a little cell working together. But Tom, he had worked on he before games. He had worked in music, so he had worked with bands like Judas Priest and Kiss, and I was just like, tell me stories. So he still tells me stories all these years later. But yeah, it's really a simple, dumb story. Because again, I told you when I was in the test pit, they wanted to give me this nickname. I was like, no, don't call, if you're going to call me anything, call me the nickname I grew up with from my camp, which was Lebo. And so John Knowles knew this. And one day he just walked up to me and he's like, hey, do you mind if we use your name for the droid in Shadows of the Empire? And I'm like, well, I don't own the name, so sure. He's like, because it sounds a lot like a Star Wars name. Is that why you were named that? I'm like, no, nothing to do with that. And, he changed the spelling. And yeah, then I got I have my little Lebo action figure still from the Micro Machine days. And I think my mother was more proud of that moment than any of the games I worked on. She was like, "Oh my god!" But yeah, that was pretty much it. And I think I was just probably helping with files exchanges and things like that on that. But those guys were like, they were on their own mission with that game, and it was amazing.
Well, our parents need accolades in physical form. So you with an action figure and, diplomas and such, that's why making games won't impress your mother, because it's just a credit on the screen.
Exactly. If you get it. Yeah, here, so this is what I was telling you I did have a picture of it. I didn't realize. It's a big laminate piece that Steve pretty sure drew that.
Wow.
Then I also have, this is kind of when I started, and this is sort of towards the end. Mike losing his hair. But they used to let us take these photos. This is my Sam & Max floaty pen. And you've seen this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen this ad? Yeah. This was kind of a big moment when we were finally hiring 3D artists.
Even the wanted ads look cool at LucasArts. Still in 1996, you are credited as an art technician on Afterlife. What can you tell me about the production of this game?
Oh, God. I didn't work on that much. Probably just helped out here and there with things. Big fan of Mike. I didn't work a lot on it. I remember probably helping with the people who were working on it, I think, and maybe just pointing them in the right direction. I don't know why I got thanks on that.
It was at that point in time when people got weird credits on the game.
Okay.
For example, I think on Full Throttle, Hell Barwood got a credit for thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
So people actually worked on the game, but he thought it was a good idea and got credit for it.
This falls under history is written by the winners. Like, this wasn't a communal process, the credits at LucasArts, okay? The project leaders decided, and that was it. And, they were all buddies. So they're going to put their buddies in the credits. It's that simple.
Gotcha. Still in 1996, you're credited for art, technical research, and development on Mortimer and the Riddles of the Medallion. Now, Mortimer was the first 640 by 480 LucasArts game, which at the time was considered high-quality graphics. Did the R&D art process center around these new capabilities?
Yeah, so from what I remember, again, that was like, so we, at this point, we had sort of, I think, officially formed the VFX department. And so I had like Andrew, Nelson, and Chris Ross, and there were some others too. Oh my God, I'm forgetting. Oh my God, this is horrible. It's going to come to me. I think Chris also, but there were others working on it. And so I think, again, I was brought in at the beginning, did a bunch of tests, I remember, with the flying, right, and the cutscenes and everything, and sort of established the procedure, like how basically it was always about the art pipeline, right? Like, how is the art pipeline going to work? And that's what I was usually involved with at the beginning. And then after that, I think I stepped away and they did most of the work on it, those guys. And I was kind of just overseeing it at that point. But yeah, I mean, that was Colette's baby. That never would have happened without Randy Commissar. I don't know how much you've talked about him, but look, I was at LucasArts 7 years, I think, 7.5 years, and I think there were 5 presidents in 7 years. It was kind of a joke, especially those first few years. It was just like boom, boom, boom. And then it's the last few years, it stabilized with Kelly and then into Jack and Steve. But those years with Randy were very unique because he was outside of the games industry. I mean, I'm sure others have told you this, but the only party I can remember at LucasArts when a game shipped was for Full Throttle. And we all went into the city and they rented out a club and there was music. And why didn't we do that after every game? I mean, we were killing ourselves. And literally, the standard procedure was meet out on the patio and have a beer, for half an hour and everyone would just go home. It was like, but he did things differently. He was great. I learned a lot from him too. Great guy. And he embraced new ideas and he was willing to take chances, and he loved Colette, and that's really why Mortimer happened.
In Curse of Monkey Island, which was released in 1997, you are credited as an additional art technician. What did the role of the art technician entail, and what additional work were you assigned to?
Okay, so Curse, again, was one of these ones brought in at the beginning. Everyone forgets. But this was a shift from using the animation system I built on the Dig to now let's take another look at these outside systems because they'd gotten better and the price had come down. And I think I even recommended, like, you should buy this. Like, this is better than what I built. I mean, this was a full-time, like, big animation studios were using this now. It was based on scanning. And so that's really what I did at the beginning of that, I think, was just help get that set up, and rolling. After that, I'd have to think about it. The main thing I did really on Curse was at the beginning, again, sitting down with Larry and the entire opening cutscene, and I think several others, we edited in Media 100. And so that whole opening cutscene, we were kind of prevising it and putting the shots together. And so I worked on that at the beginning. But then I think I got sucked into probably working on Jedi Knight at that point. And so that's all I was working on. And so I stopped working on that.
Okay. Still in 1997, you were credited for cutscene effects on Herc's Adventures. Do you remember which cutscenes you worked on?
No, but I remember we did a lot on that. That was Pete Sakel. Leading the charge there. I think we were doing like glowing effects and like sort of bringing things to life, little ambient things, particle effects maybe in certain shots as well. That was a fun game. I don't think it did as well as we thought it was going to do, but people had a lot of fun making that. Was that Mike Hebert? Who was the project lead on Herx? I'm trying to remember.
The lead programmer was Dean Sharp, and the game design was also Dean Sharp and Mike Hebert.
Yeah, so it was Mike. Mike and Dean. They were like a combo. Yeah, so that was again, I think us using After Effects in different shots. Yeah, I'd have to see some of it. That's been a while.
And after various technical and artistic roles in 1997, you assumed the role of assistant producer on Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight. What did that role entail? And in what way was the production of this game different from the production of Dark Forces?
Well, this is, a few years later. The technology had totally evolved at this point. Rebel 2 was done. And, this whole new team was brought in to, first-person shooters has emerged as a genre, right? So LucasArts is like, all right, we got to make our take on this. And the team brought in Ray and Rob. These guys had come. They had made the game Descent, if you remember that. And so these guys were really like building out this whole first-person shooter engine for the first one and sort of knew they could take it to the next level for the next one. But for Dark Forces 2, like Justin Chin, he really had a vision, and again, someone who's left games amazingly. I mean, at the time, great friend and but at the time listed as one of like the top 20 all-time game designers and just walked away after it to make movies, right? And make films. So that was his passion, but we didn't really know it at the time, but it started to blossom during this. And this was like, LucasArts, let's just be real, it was very cliquey. There were different groups and friends and people who got along better. And so this, for us, this was like the dream team. Like we were all so excited because we were all such good friends before this. And this was like Justin, Ralph, Gary Gaber, myself, Andrew, Chris, and Justin just wanted to take the cinematics to the next level. And, this was like an original, again, how the hell did they let us do this? But really like the first original, Star Wars original story kind of post movies. And there was huge amounts of R&D leading up to this. I mean, months of us, that's all we were doing was just seeing if any of this was even going to be possible. Like, how are we going to make digital lightsabers? It had never been done. I went over to ILM to talk about it. They're like, we don't know. We haven't done it. I'm like, okay. And we were literally out in the parking lot every day, just trying weird things. I have some of this footage. I could dig it up probably of us testing with Justin. And I think I have. Let me see if I have that here. Did I put that in this folder? If not, I'll find it right after this for you. I'll send it to you. But
I really hope that your hard drive is backed up on several cloud services.
Well, I literally, okay, and this was like, I found this folder I told you before we started, 15 minutes, and I found these photos. I don't know if you can see these. That's John Knowles. I don't even remember what we were doing for this, but these were like, you see what that is that's that reflective material. That's how they did the original lightsabers, right? They had a reflective cinema, that. Okay, so we were trying to replicate that first. We're like, hey, maybe we should do it that way. We literally would have these sticks and like taping them up and go out back. And then we were like, that didn't work at all. It looked horrible. And we couldn't get the right lighting and we couldn't composite it. And then then we just literally started spray painting, wooden dowels. We would fluorescent paint. And I'm like, I think if we do that, I could pull a mat, just from that. Didn't even need to be on a blue screen. That's why we were doing it out in the parking lot. Cause I'm like, I can just isolate this color, I think, which today sounds easy, but this was hard. Like, the algorithms weren't as good back then. So I think literally probably for off and on for 2 months, we were just working on the lightsabers because we knew lightsabers were such a big part of that game. And not the game, the cutscenes, right? And the battles with them. And like, we just said, like, if these don't look as good as the movies, it's just going to look totally hockey. And we would sit there, watch the movies literally frame by frame, over and over, looking at every little, like, just, okay. And then we'd be going to After Effects and trying to compare it, to get the right amount of glow and motion blur and all those things. And, yes, it was 8-bit. I look at it now. Some of the scene, a couple of the shots I wince on, but I think for the most part, it's held up pretty good. Like I was watching the opening cutscene. We had great actors, and like, just we went down to Van Nuys, eventually for over 2 weeks. We were just shooting on a blue screen set. And again, this was not typical in Hollywood at the time. Now it is. Even the actors and all these people we hired, this was foreign to them. And we were kind of the ones pushing it. I remember I have his picture right here. Ma the Half Soldier was a character in that. And he didn't have any legs, right? So I put like a thing to track kind of in that area. And it was like a big joke on the set and no one understood it. And it was like, why are you putting a tennis ball in my crotch? And like, but like, that is how we tracked it afterwards. And then we were able, and we were doing all these, we had this Jim, I can't remember his last name, and he worked on Rebel 2 also, just this amazing video engineer. So he was down there with us, and like, because back then you couldn't pull real time, like everything we were doing was post process after things were digitized. He had a tool, like a chroma tool, trying to remember the name of it, Digimat, where he could do it real time. So basically he was able to show us in real time what things looked like on set. And then I was there with my Mac, and I was then digitizing stuff, and we were like comping it in real time to make sure everything looked good. And yeah, I could talk about this project for a while, but the set, Ralph and Gary were down there with us. And it got tense as things went into it, because Justin and the director did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. And as the project kind of kept going, and I was so proud of Justin, he really had to stand up for himself. And at some point, there were points in it where he was just like, the director's like, we can't do that shot. And Justin's like, are you kidding me? Like, let me do it. Step out of the way. Like, there's one shot where one of the characters falls on the ground and the camera's right on the ground. Mm-hmm. That was like an hour argument, about that shot, because the director just couldn't, I can't get the camera that low. And Justin's like, give me the camera. I will show you how to do this shot. And so, and they were like, who are you guys? You're game guys. What do you know? I heard, that's where the first time I heard the expression, this ain't my first rodeo. So yeah, there was definitely like a Hollywood, a little bit of a game culture clash, but like that was a time we were working with ILM, right? They probably didn't get enough. Did they get credit in that? They should have, but we were working with, Don Nees was his name, I think. Great human being. He was in charge of the Lucas archives, but he also built props and models. And so he was the one who built all the lightsabers and all the little, I still have a couple of those somewhere, the ones that got smashed on the set. They were like hologram devices that we made too, but also all the prosthetics and the props, the makeup that was done. I'm pretty sure that that was either ILM helping. Well, we definitely got a lot of their props and to sort of build off of, like, because we had the guy with the three eyes, what's his name, as well. So it was a lot coming together for that. It was a lot of fun.
So these were not creative differences, but more of technical differences or arguments regarding how a shot should be created for the game, or whether or not it's possible.
It was a lot of like that stuff, like at the end about what was possible. This director we hired, I don't know if he was lazy or it was just a job to him, but like to us, this was like life and death, and Justin especially, we had all worked on the story together beforehand and the storyboards for it. And so we cared a lot about all the shots, and when he didn't want to do a shot the way we wanted, or specifically Justin, because I certainly was shutting up and letting Justin argue with the guy. But I was like, we were always the kind of like Justin would come over to us and get all fired up, and we'd be like, well, go tell him, and he'd go do it. And yeah, like it probably wasn't as horrible as I'm making it sound right now, but there were just some moments where things got tense, but like the actors were great. I mean, working with actors are all just they were all professional, and they were just thrilled that they were working on anything related to a Star Wars. I mean, I remember literally Ma, the actor, and I remember seeing him on some other little HBO cheesy things after. I remember him coming up to me and being like, look, if you guys do any more of this, please, remember me, call me back. And I'm like, I don't think that's under my purview, but okay, thanks, buddy.
And around the same time, basically in 1997, Lucasfilm released the special editions of Star Wars. And around the same time, they also started producing The Phantom Menace. So while they were working on these two projects, were you able to use any of the technologies or any of the advancements they made for these the special editions and The Phantom Menace in Jedi Knight?
Well, I was gone by The Phantom Menace, but when the special editions were happening, and this is again one of the perks of like, hey, Mike, you got the video camera. So I was the one they sent up to the ranch when they were actually debuting this footage, like for the first time to the public. Like I saw that Jabba shot, before anyone saw it. I was like, oh my God. I remember shooting that, and I think I shook the camera. I was like, but no, I mean, it was really what I was saying before, because like everything leading up to that, Young Indy, if you remember that series,
mm-hmm.
Young Indy's real purpose in life was like to test to make the new Star Wars movies and those kind of changes. And it was really like a giant experiment for them. So yeah, I mean, in particular, I think for the first one, like those were sort of very hand done shots. I mean, honestly, I'm going to give you like a different answer here, but the thing that had the most impact when we were working during all this was not that. It was Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was the moment. That's when literally, I mean, we got to see this movie, I remember, after it, that they made internally at ILM that they never released. But I think Phil Tippett, who I've got to work with after this, is just unbelievable. But like just hearing him talk about it, because like that was the moment that digital took over. Even though it was, we know now it was duct tape and stapled together, and all those shots were like hand done. That's why they still look so good, right? And nothing looked as good after it for years, right? Because Spaz and those guys, but there was great collaboration going on then between ILM and LucasArts in terms of sharing knowledge. And that was like having Spaz and Mark DePay come over and talk to us, and Colette like somehow convincing John Knoll to come over and literally give us Photoshop lessons and core. And like, okay, oh, what are your pain points? Oh, I could write something to help you do. Like what? Okay, and then at some point in all this too, and I guess a good segue for me is like we started using this tool that ILM was using a lot called Flipbook. And Flipbook was written by this guy, Scott Squires. And I started to get to know him a little bit through using this tool. And what Flipbook was it was revolutionary because it let you very quickly play back high-res video on your Mac, like film-like quality, and you could paint right on the because at ILM, again, they were hand touching everything and they were rotoscoping, right? Everything. And so we started using that tool quite a bit at LucasArts for all kinds of little things just to experiment and do tests. And ultimately, as we were winding down, so Jedi Knight, Dark Forces, we shot all that footage, then we came back to Lucas, and then we had a lot of work to do, right? To composite and do all those effects. And, I kind of joke to this day because I was so like, whatever back then. Like we could have worked on that for another 9 months and management would not have blinked an eye. But I was like just hell bent on like getting it done again. And I just drove my team, they'll tell you to this day, like very hard, Chris and Andrew, just to get it done quickly and efficiently. So we were done with the cutscenes like 6 to 9 months, before the game was done. And so at this point, there started to be this beginning of an exodus from the art department. And, this is, again, these sort of like, I think there are these shifts in LucasArts history, and like I said, I was lucky to be there to see the tail end of one of them. And then this was, first of all, Colette had stepped down as the art director, right? So this was the beginning of the end, okay? Because she was not replaceable, okay? But we all knew she wanted to move on. She wanted to make Mortimer and do other things. And so I can't remember who had left at that point, but I wasn't the first. I knew that. And you could feel this momentum starting to happen of people in the art department wanting that we're going to move on. And for me, it was sort of just all, again, one of those just timing things. Like I was close with the ILM people. My friend Forrest basically negotiated something where they were going to take Flipbook and turn it into a real tool and sell it to people, I went over there one day and he's like, you should come work for us. And, at the time, very interested in visual effects and getting to work with Scott, who is a unbelievable human being, 2, visual effects legend. He worked on Close Encounters. He worked with Doug Trumbull. Like the stories he would tell were just mind-boggling to me. So getting a chance to go work with him, and I just knew the space and how different this tool was, right? And After Effects wasn't doing any of these things that this tool could do. And so that's when I ended up leaving, basically, to go work for this new company, all ILM people, Puffin Designs. And that was probably, towards the end of 97 or something like that. And so went over and started, my foray there. And that actually, there were a few other LucasArts people who worked for that company, like Aaron Mozowski. And what happened is, because of that, a bunch of Andrew Nelson, these people actually went on, because they knew Commotion, what Flipbook turned into, to work for ILM. And they worked on Phantom Menace. And they did tons of rotoscoping shots on it. So that's a little side ditty tale that happened out of that.
So Jedi Knight was the last project you worked on at LucasArts?
Yeah. I mean, other than whatever little things I was helping on, but that was definitely the last major thing I did.
Now, after leaving LucasArts, you got into Adobe Flash. Now, as a former Flash developer, I appreciate anyone using this magnificent platform before Steve Jobs ran it into the ground.
You're right. You know.
I even got the Adobe Flash Player
Oh my
T-shirt.
God, look at that. I didn't even notice. Well, I'll tell you, no, honestly, like basically what happened is I was working for Puffin Designs. I was the company that did that software. And at this point, I had my East Coast roots had enough with California. I needed to get back to humidity, bugs, and winter, and people who were not so passive aggressive. I like aggressive, not passive aggressive. Okay. And so, yeah, I basically ended up moving back to the East Coast when I was working for Puffin, because I was like, we'd hit every production, company and visual effects on the West Coast. And I was like, hey, there's lots in New York. And like, why don't you help me move back? And they were like, sure, good idea. And so I started, I was doing that, but I started seeing Flash right when I was back here. And instantly it reminded me of the old days at LucasArts, because at this point we'd moved into 3D and 3D was starting to take over games. And I was like, wow, this is like what I know, and so, yeah, we had a great run doing Flash stuff, and we worked with all these like celebrities and with the music companies, and it was, hindsight's 2020. But when I moved back to the East Coast, I was whatever, by hook or crook, I hooked up with like the music record labels and Hasbro. And, at the time, I just take things for granted. You don't know what you don't know. But to them, they were just like, who is like what we knew compared to the people back here on the East Coast? It was so much more advanced. Like, I just didn't realize it at the time, but it did lead to us doing some very cool, some fun little sort of adventure gamey things that we did with the record labels, like with all these hip hop stars. We were sort of like making like little mini stupid adventure games. But then, that turned into us doing multi-million-dollar projects with Hasbro, Littlest Pet Shop, Virtual World, and eventually launching our own virtual world, right, in the Club Penguin era. That was a whole crazy run as well that we did with supporting, the sort of beginning of learning how to support communities and 24/7 moderating. And, it was an interesting time. And, out of all those things, Disney bought Club Penguin, of course. And it's funny how a lot of that stuff is coming back now, especially in the space we're in now. But it's, back then everything was crude, right? Like you had to get credit cards and have parents, be able. We were constantly like dealing with credit card chargebacks and just stupid things, and like playing recess hall monitor for kids. And yeah, so Flash was, it was a tool that we used for so many different things, from that kind of stuff to games, and it was fun while it lasted. But yeah, thank you, Steve.
I miss those full screen Flash websites. I think that the movie industry and the music industry are the last ones to still use Flash websites, because they were being phased out around 2011. But still, HTML5 didn't have the audio capabilities and none of the video capabilities that Flash had at the time. And so they would still, I think that full screen Flash websites stuck around until 2012. And then even the music industry and the movie industry phased them out. And since then, I've been missing the Adobe Flash platform.
What's going to happen, though, to predict the future, is browser-based content is going to come back stronger than ever. It's already starting to happen, and with WebGL games, and then on the horizon with WebGPU coming, it's not going to be long till we really are playing like PC console experiences right in our browser. I mean, you think about it, it's kind of just ridiculous that we can't. We're on these PCs and computers that are so powerful, yet the browser is so limited still in terms of you're literally on the same platform.
Well, before Adobe killed Flash, or Steve Jobs killed Flash, they were working on the Stage 3D project, the Molehill project, which turned into Stage 3D, which was, hardware accelerated 3D engine inside of Flash. But that was in 2011, and we're now 13 years later, and we don't have anything like that in HTML5. So maybe Steve should have kept his mouth shut.
Well, it was a complicated thing, right? And it was also because of the phone, right? That's why he really wanted to kill it, right?
The only reason why he wanted to kill it was because if you have Flash games that can be played on the iPhone, then you don't need the App Store. That was his problem.
And look what happened. He was in some ways very smart because that worked out pretty well for them.
For them, not for us.
Well, yeah. I mean, it did spawn an entire gaming ecosystem and platform that was probably infinitely more monetizable, right? Than that was the problem with Flash, was how to monetize it. That was the big problem, because we had to this was before Stripe, right? And crypto and easy ways to pay people, right? Mm-hmm. So it was very difficult. This is why Apple won, right? And Amazon, because they had the credit cards. It's that simple.
True. Now, in 2008, you received special thanks on Bill Taylor's A Vampire Story. What exactly did you do to earn this acknowledgement in the game?
I remember just helping him when he was making it. I think we might have, what did we do? Probably general support. I can't remember exactly what we did. Okay. Not ringing a bell. I remember the game very well, and I remember helping him with it. What year was this?
2008.
Okay.
Still in 2008, you're credited as executive producer and co-project lead on Insecticide. What can you tell me about the production of this game?
Well, Insecticide, again, one of my love childs. But that was like really a LucasArts reunion, and something we got to make. We made that before the term indie games existed. And that was kind of the beginning of indie games. And it started out great, and I'm very proud of it, honestly. But, it ended up sort of with business complications that we could talk about a little. But yeah, I mean, making that, we had Peter Chan and Peter McConnell and Larry, of course, as the lead, and so many others I'm forgetting right now who worked on that from Lucas. And so, yeah, we were trying to kind of take the adventure game to the next level, right? Because when we pitched it, first of all, this was in an era, you pitched publishers adventure games, they'd pretty much laugh in your face. So when we went to Gamecock, who was really, if you know the history at all, Gamecock ended up folding, but that's what became Devolver and those guys, Mike Wilson and Harry and those guys. So, they, to their credit, were looking for weird indie, different kind of stuff before anyone was. And all the games they signed, and, Mike was infamous for these crazy parties he would throw when he was head of marketing at id and for Doom, and you just hear these. We were a little scared, honestly, working with him, but he really loved the LucasArts games and believed we could make this. This is pre-Unity, right? This is back then, this was very new to us, especially me, making our own game. We actually ended up we controlled all the creative and the cutscenes and everything, but we had to work with an outside. We ended up working with an outside company to do the programming, which, looking back on it, was not a wise decision. But we used their engine, which at the time was actually pretty amazing because we were able to do a 3D game on Nintendo DS, which almost no one was doing at the time. So that was pretty impressive. And, we had the budget to finish the game. And as we got through it, it was, first of all, it was originally going to be for the PSP. And so that's why it was going to be much more cinematic. And then suddenly it was like, oh, wait, PSP's dying. We need to get this on Nintendo DS. And we were just like, what? Like, this is going to look horrible. But somehow we made it playable with their engine and working. And for us, it was much more about the PC version, right? And we were able to get, it was also sort of the beginning of experimenting. It was before Telltale with episodic, right? So we did it in 2 parts. And we wanted to, it was almost at the insistence of the publisher, but I was really pushing for it too, of like, look, there's action adventure movies. Why can't there be action adventure games? Where we have parts that are really classic adventure and, just like in a movie, a slower part where we're interrogating, a villain or a criminal, and then boom, there's an action scene and you're out in a chase, and we're like, that should work. And so that's really what we wanted to do. That was kind of and obviously just like the film noir, Dave Grossman worked on at the beginning a lot as well and helped us shape the world and the story. And then Gamecock lost their funding because it was 2008, I think. The crash happened, right? Wall Street, their investors pulled out, and they basically didn't give us any more money to finish part 2. So that was kind of the ugly. And then they ended up selling the game to South Peak, who I'm not even going to say anything about. But, at this point, I think you could still get part 1 on Steam, but, we haven't literally seen a royalty report in a decade from it and are kind of completely disconnected from it. We always talk about bringing it back maybe at some point or making a new one. But it's something, I'm actually doing VO for the game I'm working on now next week. And the 3 actors we're working with were the 3 of the leads in Insecticide.
Wow. Quite a reunion.
Yeah.
In 2015, you got special thanks on Star Wars Battlefront. What exactly did you do to earn this acknowledgement in the game?
Probably bought Gary Gaber a lot of lunches.
And then for the expansion pack, the following year, the Death Star expansion pack, more lunches.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I was gone. When did that come out? I was gone when that came out.
2015 and 2016.
Yeah, I was long gone at that point. So, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. In 2017, you were credited for additional compositing and editing on Full Throttle Remastered, which is the same credit you received for the original game. So you didn't actively participate in the production of the remastered. It's the original credit.
Yeah, I haven't helped with any of those. When the Dark Forces remaster that they just did, though, those guys did contact me, and I tried to help them as much as I could because they got very little from Lucas or Disney, and so I was trying to, I don't know if you've heard that story also, that when, and this is true, that when I guess Disney bought Lucas, or they were moving from the Fireman's Fund building, all this stuff was stored, all the old concept art and everything was stored in a warehouse in Oakland or Alameda. Have you heard these stories? Mm-hmm. And basically, literally, they were about to throw everything out, everything. Like the entire history of Lucasfilm games in these boxes, and Peter Chen, and just some janitor or something was like, called someone. It was like, I think someone should look at these before we toss them. And Disney literally like saved them all at the last second. I think the guy from Disney, Lucasfilm Games, told me that story. Actually, the guy who's running it now.
In 2021, you came full circle with the Sam & Max franchise and became the executive producer on Sam & Max. This time it's virtual. What can you tell me about the production of this game?
It was so fun. It was just like a dream come true, honestly, to make that happen. That Steve even said yes, and it's like, yeah. I joked with him. It's like, yeah, I've been waiting for this for 30 years. This is why I've been friends with you, so I could ask you to do a Sam & Max game. But actually, I think early on after we left Lucas, we talked about doing a Sam & Max Flash game. We almost did one with him, and yeah, but he didn't trust me enough then, and I don't blame him. And we didn't have good enough artists, and he didn't know Flash well enough. So Steve's smart guy. Smarter than me, and so he was like, no. But this time, decades later, and he'd seen all the stuff we'd been doing, so I think there was trust, at that point, and there hadn't been a Sam & Max game made in a long time, and so we had been in AR for quite a few years doing augmented reality stuff on the bleeding edge of what I felt the future of games could be, and still do. And I actually got it, all things start and end with Lucas. They really do. Because I got into that after I started Happy Giant, this my second company after Pileated Pictures, which we raised a little bit of money for. We did some free-to-play apps, and I just wasn't loving free-to-play. And my friend Wallace, who I mentioned a few times, FM Towns, and he was working for Magic Leap, the company that really started the whole AR headset movement. If you remember them, raised billions. So he invited me down there very early on to see what they were working on. And I saw the same demos, they had showed Spielberg and Lucas, and everyone who had seen it was like blown away, and couldn't give these guys enough money, and they brought me in to see it. They really hadn't shown it to any game devs yet. They'd shown it to film people, and they showed it to me, and I was kind of like, ho hum. Like, at one part of me was actually, I did get it, and it did catapult the next 7 years for us of making AR games, but it was so crude and early. They were showing me like a character just doing a walk cycle, no control, nothing. I'm like, am I supposed to be impressed with this? But it was enough to show me, though, that this was gonna be a thing. So anyways, we did that for a bunch of years. We worked with Niantic and all that kind of stuff. But I sort of read the tea leaves in terms of where I felt mobile AR game was going. I was like, this is going nowhere fast, right? Unless you're Pokemon. It just was the wrong form factor. But we had done VR stuff because it's very similar with the headsets, right? And we had made this game Hologrid. It's called Hologrid Monster Battle, which was basically Star Wars chess. It was Apple's game of the day. We worked with Phil Tippett, who created the holo chess scene. And how did that happen? Because I knew people, my friends from ILM, who now were working for Tippett, Corey, and I called him and, hey, what if we made a game together? And we were also experimenting with photogrammetry at the time, if you know what that is, which is sort of a earlier form of volumetric capture. Mm-hmm. And Chad Taylor, a friend of mine, had left ILM, who was amazing, and he was experimenting. So he came in and helped us, and we shot all these pictures of Phil's models, all these crazy monsters he has, and was like, what if we digitize these and rig them and turn them into 3D models? How would it look? And we were also messing around with AR. We kind of had this Reese's Peanut Butter Cup moment where I was like, well, what if we took this 3D creature and put it in AR? And we're like, holy shit, that looks like holo chess. So we're like, we got to make this game. So anyways, we made that with Phil and Tippett, and this is sort of just a long way of saying how we got into VR, because we made that for VR for the early Oculus. It was like a game board. And so I had the relationships with Oculus, and then literally like it's a crazy story because I went to PAX East to pitch it to Oculus, and this is literally right before the pandemic started, and no one was taking it seriously. The PAX was still going on, but the guy who worked for Facebook, Oculus, right? I had to meet him at his hotel because they told him 24 hours before that he wasn't allowed to go on the convention floor. And I was like, huh, okay. But yeah, so I met him at his hotel. And they were big Sam and Max fans, and they were like, okay, you gotta make a demo. You gotta make a demo for us. And this was before Mike was on the project, Stemley, and so we actually worked with someone who had created Sam and Max models online, and we built the office, and we put Sam and Max in the office. And as soon as I put on the headset and saw them, like when you were in the office with them, I mean, my heart skipped a beat. It was like, and I was like, Steve, I think he was afraid, honestly. Like he did it once or twice, but to him, it was so like to be that close to them, like his creations, it freaked him out. But like, it was definitely like just so fun making it. And, then once we got the green light from Oculus and got enough funding, we didn't get a lot of funding, but we got enough that, we felt we could make it. It was a little bit of a rub because they wanted a really big game. And it kind of pushed our budget beyond what we really wanted to do. But we wanted to really make something, with the spirit of Sam and Max. And, again, thank God Steve let us do it and was involved and helped us shape the story, and Peter Chan. And then Mike Stemley became available. I mean, that was the most amazing thing that could have happened because he is, there's Steve and then there's Mike, and Chuck Jordan too. I got to give Chuck credit, obviously, Telltale and all the stuff. But Mike just, he wrote Sam and Max with Steve, and he just really has and Steve will tell you he writes them a little bit different than he does, like there's subtleties and whatnot. But it just put this whole level of trust with Steve to have him on board, and Peter helping us as well, designing like the amusement park and other parts of it. So yeah, it was fun. It was crazy. And, again, at Lucas, I make no bones about it. Like I was not, I was a grunt worker, right? You interviewed all the luminaries. Now you're interviewing the grunts, but this was a chance. All I did was I was being a sponge, the whole time. I was watching these guys. I was learning. And so when we got the chance to do this, and, Larry helped a little bit too. And it was just, again, one of those kind of put the band back together. And there was a lot of pressure too from fans because they, it's tricky with VR, right? Because like, there was a lot of debates we had at the beginning about like how much of just a pure adventure game should this be. But Steve actually was the one who was like, no, like this, you have to lean into what VR is good at, like don't just redo the past in VR. So we experimented a lot in that game. Like if we stayed in VR, I'm sure like we could have actually, maybe we'll go back someday, but like we just were trying. If you've played the game or anyone who has, like every single level is almost different. So we were just trying all kinds of just weird experimental things. And, I learned a lot about VR making that game. If we make another VR game, it will not have throwing in it. Let's just put it that way. There have been long papers written about throwing in VR and how, I can't even tell you how long we worked on getting, and we didn't just have normal throwing, we had throwing of like water balloons from high up, hitting objects down below, and proper physics and timing, and you're throwing them while you're moving on a moving, one of those things that moves around a fair. It was that was one of the harder things we had to do, but we got it done. it half cured my fear of heights working on it, because the ending scene is crazy. You have to like climb this giant crane, which was my idea, and yeah, at the beginning I was literally trembling doing it, but after doing it, 100 times, but VR is by the end of it, we were kind of like done with VR. And honestly, like I've barely put on my Quest since we finished that project. And like VR is really cool, but I think we've seen like it's hard to like it hasn't seeped into sort of like the everyday game player, like even people who own them and like VR aren't putting it on every day. And for us, after doing it for a full year, where all I did was have the headset on, by the end, most of my team were getting like residual headaches, and most of my friends from VR, like from when we got, like, I'm good friends with Alex Schwartz that made Job Simulator. Same thing. Like after a few years in VR, just like, okay, I need it was great during the pandemic though, like to have that project and to be able to just escape every day into the Sam and Max world, and the jokes didn't get old. We were laughing at them for the whole project. I mean, the writing that Mike did, I thought on that was beyond incredible.
Do you think that VR is the same as 3D was back in 2009, 2010? At the time Avatar came out, and so 3D was pretty popular. And so every movie tried to be 3D, but then they just stopped making these movies in 3D because people just, they'd have 3D screenings and 2D screenings, and people would just go to 2D screenings because they didn't want to put
it's different, I think, because that was purely a gimmick, what you're talking about for the most part. Let's see how many things we can fly past their heads and whatnot. I mean, VR, once you put on a headset, this is something different and special, like a paradigm shift for technology. I think, where it struggles, and I could talk even more about the AR side to it and the Apple Vision Pro, is just there's no killer app. There's no thing in it that's going to make us start using it more than we're using our desktops or our phones. So it has a place. Enterprise and gaming, I think it just we haven't seen that sort of aha moment where it captures the zeitgeist, I don't think. And I hope Beat Saber wasn't it. But I think these, technology often, like, people get excited at the beginning, then you enter into your trough of disillusionment, and then eventually these things find their place. And that's sort of the same thing with AR. Like, I'm still very bullish on what AR can do for games, actually, more than I was just talking with my good friend about this, Charlie Fink, who writes for Forbes, and he's one of the leading people and thought leaders in that space. And it's like all this stuff from Apple about it's going to be a virtual desktop you're going to use and get rid of our okay, whatever. It's going to be much cooler when kids can like just put on a thin pair of glasses and be out in their backyards playing Pokemon and that kind of stuff. But the reality that I realized was that that's still a long way away, like at least a decade probably. So to me, I didn't want to sit around and wait for that, So there's always every 5 or so years, there's a technology shift. And I mean, really, that's been the theme of my career. That's how I've stayed alive. That's how I got ahead at LucasArts, right? I gravitate towards new tech. I like it. Sometimes you realize you're going down a path that's going nowhere. And other times it can be very fruitful and, keep us in business for years. AR was up and down, but there were a few years there where we were killing it. We were working with AR games for all the toy companies. We did AR spots for the Super Bowl. But ultimately, that's in that space too, is sort of that's what that became, is these little marketing gimmicks. And I sort of looked at this and my team, and I'm like, we want to make games. That's really what we want to do. And so ultimately we went back to making games, which is what we're doing now.
I don't think the VR needs a killer app because, for example, the iPad didn't have a killer app. It was just more convenient and cheaper than a laptop. So maybe if VR would be cheaper and more convenient than something else, then maybe people would shift towards it. Because right now, iPads have become less popular. Those standard iPads. I'm not talking about iPad Pro or such. The standard iPads became less popular because phones got bigger. And so, you can do most of the things that you could do on an iPad, on a standard iPad on your phone. And the screen is big enough. Back in 2010, when they came out with the iPad and the iPhone, the smartphone screens were much smaller. And so I think that once it will be cheaper and more convenient, then...
And more social. Because this is another one of VR's big problems, is it's very isolating. And everyone talks about, they know this, right? We need to have more social experiences. Like if you've ever done VR chat or any of those things, it's pretty cool. It's different. That was kind of the last things I did in VR, because we were doing all these interviews at the end of Sam and Max, and I would have to go into these VR interviews. So yeah, I think like that has not, because you think of the world we live in now and phones, everything is social and connected, right? Single player is a dying thing, right? And that's what VR, I think, has struggled with a little bit too.
Now, in November 2021, you founded Planet Mojo. What can you tell me about Planet Mojo?
So, as we were finishing Sam and Max, I started catching wind of what was going on in blockchain. And, this will probably be something very controversial because obviously it's very new and people still don't understand it for the most part, especially in games. But to me, I quickly realized that this could be the beginning of a major paradigm shift in games. And to me, 3 years ago when we started this, I knew, gaming business was broken. Like I could see that clearly because I'd been living and breathing it. I mean, I'm an independent game developer for decades, right? And the only way to break out of that cycle really, is to have a hit, a mega hit really to break. Otherwise, most people in this space are sort of living from project to project, right? And the only ways, it's a very top-down industry. And I'm not Nostradamus, but look where we are 3 years later, right? And look what's happened to the games industry. And, what I saw as this representing, to me, if I could boil it down to one word, was empowerment. More words, democratization and independence. Because without it, you're basically dealing with VCs, publishers, who recoup most of the money. It's a very tough business. And even when you do have everything right, just to have a sustainable hit is very difficult. So to us, this represented all those things, not just for the developers, but for the players as well. And I think the whole message has gotten clouded along the way because of what happened with NFTs and all the scamming and all the stuff that's gone on. Most of the negative sentiment that gamers have about this is based on that, right? People don't know what blockchain games are because they've barely experienced them. Quality ones don't really exist. And to players, and I think we'll look back in 10, 20 years, like our kids are going to look back on these games we've played and be like, how did you let them get away with that? Like you were paying them all this money and you didn't own your character and your weapons. And I was just talking with a very big person in Web 2 yesterday about this, and there's just so many things that it solves, from just legitimizing things and transparency. Like right now, we live in this age where people are selling Fortnite accounts on eBay, right? And scamming people. And at least when you bring this to blockchain, it's like it's legitimate, right? It can be verified, and it's by multiple computers, et cetera. And so there's much more assurance, right? So, and the community around it, we were able to build up a community very quickly of people who do care about games. And, crypto is, again, I like to be doing new and different things, right? And so this has really challenged us to learn about things we had absolutely no idea about before that. But in the end of the day, we want to make games. That's why we got into this. And so this is just when you play our first game, which is coming out in pretty soon on mobile, is Auto Chess Battler, kind of something that from that Hologrid game, a natural progression kind of. But you'd have no idea it has any Web3 or crypto in it. It's just a normal game. All that stuff is in the background. Someone told me it's the mullet approach. Nothing up front, it's all in the back. And so that stuff is kind of there in the background. We don't push it on people. We realized early on, like a lot of the stuff going on in this space was bullshit and sketchy. And like, if people don't love your game, nothing else matters, right? So you have to have a fun game first. And, the thing about this space too that was really cool is that there was really a lot of interest in the lore, and narrative and those things. And even though we're not like telling it like an adventure game in this first game, we're telling it in all these other forms. Like we're doing cinematics and we're doing, digital comic books and other things. And so like, it's kind of like a new way to tell a story, through Twitter. We had a character on Twitter tweeting his daily, threads. And I don't know how I had a phone, but so yeah, it was just something, again, we like to make original worlds. We did it. I saw it done at Lucas, learned it there, did it with Insecticide, and doing service work is nice. It pays the bills, but this is what gets us excited. And just like Insecticide, which I kind of, after Lucas, I moved out here to Western Massachusetts, very rural, very country, and so sort of bugs and insects, inspired Insecticide and me out there fishing. And with this, it was kind of the same thing, because it was at the peak height of, metaverse, right? And I was like, okay, if we're all going to go into these metaverses, I wanted Planet Mojo is really a story about like nature and technology, and like how we're all living with that here in our real lives. And so it's like a weird parallel story about that.
And when is the game coming out exactly?
Well, you can go to play.planetmojo.io right now and play the web version of Mojo Melee. We have a endless runner game, Go Mojo, that's out. So we have multiple. What we're really doing, our vision, is we're building. Now, this stuff I talk about all the time. This stuff I actually, but we're building an ecosystem really of interconnected games, and that's what the blockchain does. Is that if you own these items as digital collectibles / NFTs, you then get the benefit of using them across all our other games, and obviously can trade and sell them and rent them and do all the other cool perks you get with them.
So the same objects between games, and how do they interconnect in terms of, plot and gameplay?
Yeah, same characters, exactly. And, you idea eventually and have a sort of an interconnected currency and token between all of them. And, I'll tell you a story, honestly. When I first caught wind of this and we were making Sam & Max, my first inclination was I went to Steve. And this is when crazy NFTs make millions of dollars. And I was like, Steve, we should make Sam & Max NFTs. Like, and this is before any negative sentiment. Gamers didn't even know. And Steve, he just got that sixth sense, you know? He's like, no, let's not do this. He goes, I don't know how gamers are going to feel about it, you know? And he was right. Thank God we didn't. But it didn't slow me down. I just like, okay, we'll put something else in there. But, you know, to me is also like, you know, throughout gaming, like there are certain paradigm shifts, and that's usually when new IP is spawned and born. There's really very few opportunities. And so that's another thing about this that excited us is like, wow, we can get independent funding and build something, you know, build the next Star Wars. That's what we want to do. And that, you know, the whole nature thing too, I learned that from Lucas, right? That's why I live here, because none of this stuff when I started working there, but over time, I started to get to go up to the ranch a lot, right? And even do work there sometimes. And yeah, and I was like, you know, it just sort of started to feel right to me that if I'm going to be sitting in front of this screen 12 hours a day, I'd rather have nature outside when I walk out the door than walk out into a big city or whatever. So that was my whole thing. I left Marin. I was like, you know what? I'm coming back to where I grew up, and I'm going to buy my own Skywalker ranch, you know, where at a penny on the dollar, right? Compared to Marin. And that's really what I did. And so sort of like, I like that balance, you know, of computers, but I can go out and touch grass, as they say.
Now, earlier in this year, you received special thanks on the Dark Forces remaster. Now, I presume that given that you only got special thanks, I can assume that they didn't utilize any of the cutscene video effects you worked on in the original, right?
Well, they made them all better. I saw what they did. They up-resed them all and everything. And I, like I said earlier, they reached out to me because they were looking for anything from the first one. The reality is I didn't have much from Dark Forces. I have a ton from Dark Forces 2. You know, because Dark Forces, again, was very early and we were only doing a couple shots on it. But I really said to them, I mean, I helped them as much as I could and I gave them a bunch of stuff, but then I hooked them up with Justin, who I think helped them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, hopefully they're going to make the Dark Forces 2 next remaster. Not that I have any inside information on that, but like, no, I don't.
But if they do you have uncompressed footage?
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I think... Hold on.
I'm waiting.
Yeah, I have this. I don't think I saved because I didn't think you'd care about this.
I care about everything.
I could tell now. Yeah, like I have tons of these movies from.
Been keeping us on the run since the destruction of the Death Star.
But that, like, here, I'll turn it down. Yeah, see, that's a shot I did. And then Justin was drawing Kyle, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this was like us doing this. They probably had to get rights to use it. I have no idea. I just was like, hey, look, we can put this in the game. And they're like, oh, okay. See, this kind of like, I think, you know, we would help with this type of animation, cutting it up and giving it back to them.
Oh.
You know, and anything Star Wars also, whether, I can't remember if John Knowles worked on this or not, but he was definitely always helping because he, you know, like I think on, here's the game. I think on X-Wing, you know, there's just a joke about this that I'm sure people know this, but like, you know, in X-Wing, there was one explosion that he had from ILM. And I used to sit there and watch. He would teach me, like he took the one explosion and turned it into like 50 different explosions. Because he would twist it and turn it and make the parts and change the colors. And it was like, and there was this one point through Missing Link in the exabyte drive, we got 50 new explosions from ILM. Original, I still have them somewhere. It was called Booms. And they were like the original Star Wars stuff that they shot, like live action, blowing stuff up. And we were like John was like, he didn't even know what to do with it because he'd just been having this one explosion for years. It's like, but yeah, I have tons of these movies. I mean, if you really want to.
I really want to.
You really want to.
I'm just wondering how big were the original video files that you had to compress them so much at the time?
I mean, yeah, compression wasn't good back then, right? It was we didn't have like MP4 and H.264 and all those things. So yeah, no, these gigantic, at least back then in terms of like, that's why I was always asking them for more bigger hard drives, because we would have the source files of everything, and we didn't want to throw that out, before we would sort of keep everything as high res as possible till that last step. And that's usually was debabbilizer, right? Where we would be running those scripts at night on every single shot. Like that became the main thing we were always doing, is like, and pulling those, pulling the best 256 colors, like that became an art form.
Now, a couple of days ago, George Lucas celebrated his 80th birthday. What can you tell me about this photo?
Yeah, this is so this was right before I started, really, at LucasArts, and this hung up in the test pit, I think, for the longest time, because of course they were just so excited that they got to take a pic with George, or as Dave Popovich would call him, the short little fuzzy guy. But yeah, I mean, if you get in here closely and you want to, I mean, there's a lot of people in here that stayed. I don't know everyone, but I can name most of them. And that's Tamerlan down below, who was, the VO director with Chris, and that was her boyfriend at the time. I can't remember his name. He was Italian. That's George Lucas. You might know him.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's that guy on the left of George. Yeah, him. That was the guy I was talking about, the pilot. I think Captain whatever. Behind George, that's purple. Wait, two behind him, the tall guy. No, tall guy. Yeah, that's purple. James Hampton. Oh my God, who is that next to purple? I'm not sure. That's not Bill Eakin, is it? Wow. Now, okay, well, that's Brett Mogilevsky right there. You're right near. Yep. That's Brett when he was in the test pit. And that's Mark Cartwright right below him. Goat. And that's Justin next to Brett, engineer. And then I don't remember these people's names. This is horrible. And I don't remember the tall guy. This is horrible. I don't remember his name, but I think it was Brad. He was a great guy. He went to work for Humongous, got in a motorcycle accident and passed away. It was very sad. Two away from him, that's Wayne Klein, who ran the QA department. And the tall guy above him is John Van, who was the guy I said was really good at beating Darth Vader. And his brother was Tony Van, who used to take credit for inventing Rebel Assault, even though he really didn't. We all used to joke about that. And the guy next to Tony, that's Dave Popovich, who passed away also. And he was another one of the leaders of the QA pit. So I think that's almost everybody.
Wow. So there. George Lucas came in to take a photo.
Well, this was the Christmas party. So they used to have a big Christmas party once a year. I took my now wife, great story, where she literally this close almost spilled an entire bowl of hot fudge onto George. But yeah, so this was like the one time he would normally gather with the little people. And so, yes, there he is. It's a great moment in time, though, right before things started. When I started at LucasArts, it was 50 people, about 50 plus. And when I left, it was 350. Right. And when I started, it was 5 1/4 inch floppies. And when I left, we were just starting to hear about the internet. The internet, I'm sure you've heard those days in LucasArts, was you had to get a key to go into a closet with the one computer that was hooked up to the internet. They didn't think it had anything to do with our business.
Yeah. Well, it took away the profitable business of hint books, because once you have walkthroughs on the internet, then you don't need hint books. Now, before we conclude our conversation, one last question from me. What are your plans for 2024, and how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
Well, yeah, if you want to check out what we're doing now, go to planetmojo.io, where everything you want to find is there. We have a Discord server. We have Twitter. I have my own Twitter account, Mike Levine 47, I think. And I'm often tweeting Lucas things. And there's a great, what is it called? From Lucasfilm to LucasArts or something, that Twitter account. It's great, whoever runs that. And so he's always boosting things I post and things I find and whatnot. So any other things I dig up here. Yeah, a few other props I didn't show you. Like I found this. This is when we moved from Kerner to the Fireman's Fund building.
Wow.
And I actually was kind of psyched I found this because I couldn't remember when we moved. And this actually has the date on it, August 14th, 95. So that's now been settled. And I found this crazy thing too that you'd probably love to see. That was like this, I think Sue Sesserman wrote it, but it's like the history of LucasArts milestones. But it's like from 82 to, it ends in 92, I think. 93. So it's definitely covers the early years. It was like a press thing, I think they wrote for people.
It covered the golden era of LucasArts.
I brought one adventurer I still had. You're going to like this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I got props.
We'll have to have another conversation with nothing but props. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining me for a conversation today. It's been truly an honor to have you over, and it's been great to hear you talk about the good old days.
I appreciate you having me. I wish I could remember more. It's a lot of feeling at this point. I remember the feelings and I remember the people. And, some of these people have gone on to be lifelong friends, and people I trust, like when I see something that's really cool, that sort of has that LucasArts vibe, I write, Steve or Mike or Peter. I'm like, have you seen this? Like Dave the Diver. I don't know if you've seen that game.
Nope.
Do you know Dave the Diver? I haven't even played it. I watched the movie, but I watched it and I was just like, wow, this has the LucasArts spirit of old. You'd love it, I think. Check it out, because it's like, it is another example of what I was talking about, how adventure games have been blended in. So it's like they blend in that adventure mechanic. You're out talking to these weird characters out on your boat, but you're basically run a sushi restaurant in the day. And at night you have to go out diving in the ocean to collect your ingredients, but things get very weird underwater. Let's just put it that way. And yeah, it has a pixel look. So it just really just had that LucasArts vibe to me.
It does sound very LucasArtsy.
Yeah, it won like Game of the Year accolades for indie game, that kind of a thing.
I'll check it out. Well, thank you again, Mike.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for doing these. I'm glad you're chronicling this history.